12 miles below. Synopsis. The world is in ruins. Extreme sub-zero temperatures suffocate the surface, making even simple survival an ordeal. Frozen derelicts of bygone eras span across massive ice wastes. And the survivors closely guard any technology rediscovered within. The only escape from the deadly climate is beneath the surface. But it's another disaster underground. Monstrous machines lurk in the depths. Unhinged demigods war against them, dying over and over, treating it all like a game. The land itself shifts over time, more contraption than rock. And an ominous prophecy states that the key to everything waits on 4 heroes, but nobody knows who or where they are. When an expedition into the far uncharted north goes terribly wrong, Keith Winterscar and his father get trapped together in a desperate fight for survival. Stumbling upon an ancient war of titanic scale, the two will need to set their differences aside while they struggle against gods, legends, and the grand secrets of the realm that lies below. Chapter 1, Only a Nightmare. You have about 3 minutes to live, if you fuck up and get your suit punctured. The old engineer fussed over a few metal toolboxes on his bench, pulling out the contents, explaining as he went. First few seconds, frostbite sets in the local puncture area. After that, the freezing temperature leaks in and overpowers the suit's rebreather, usually around the 1-minute mark. Better be holding your breath by that point. You die the moment you can't. Everyone said it's really bad if something happened outside the heated clan walls. And then they'd shoo me away when I'd ask them how bad. Today I'd get my answer. It was hard to see what the old engineer had been doing, since the workbench was made for grown UPS. I craned my head over the lip of the table, to get a better view. The toolbox was gently pushed away as he spoke. Most adults can hold their breath about 2 minutes while under stress. Factor that in and that's why it's roughly 3 minutes before lights out. Then he brought his elbows on the table, lowering his head so that he was more at eye level with me. See why folks beat around the snow telling you kids what's out there? You're 10, go be a normal brat and play with your friends. Leave the worrying to the adults. It's not pretty out on those expeditions. I was, as he put it, too old to care about keeping secrets. He'd tell me about whatever I asked. So, ever since I found him, I'd been sneaking past the house guards and making my way to his workstation, deep in the bowels of the colony. Now, here's a challenge for you, he grinned. How would you patch up the environmental suit fast enough to beat the timer? I frowned in thought. A couple ideas floated to my head but none seemed to fit right. So I did what I do best, I looked for a way to cheat and get an edge. I'm betting he'd pulled everything out for a reason. The answer was probably on his workbench. A square piece of suit fabric caught my attention. A patch. That didn't seem right, sewing took a long time. Also I didn't see any needles or thread anywhere on that table. A patch with a sticky surface? Like a really strong sticker. You're close, but there's some issues with that answer. His hand picked up that piece of fabric along with a spare knife. Imagine you're having a nice stroll outside and your suit gets a rip, like this. The tough material took him a good moment of struggling to tear through with the knife. Now in most cases, you'll be panicking and not thinking clearly. A patch needs too many steps for your groggy mind to handle. And a sticker, well you'd need to rip off the other end, little tough to do with thick gloves. We need something faster and easier. He set down the knife and picked up a strange fat gun off the table, flipping a switch on it. That's where this comes in. Catch. I caught the heavy gun thing with a slight fumble. Welding lines held together different parts and string tied a circuit chip to the side. The barrel was way too fat compared to sidearms and rifles. Looks weird. Does it really shoot bullets? Nope. It has been modified to fire out superheated glue. It's a hot glue gun. He cackled, as if this was the world's funniest joke. You're going to glue the suit back together. I said, stunned. That's dumb. He ruffled my hair with a wide smile and took the weird gun back from my hands. Well, if it's dumb, but it works, then it's not dumb. And boy does it work. Fast on his feet, he turned on his chair and fired a snotful of glue at the rib, almost point blank. There. All done. He patted the cloth, where the glue had sunk into the tear, already hardened over. Easy, see? That'll hold off the environment for a few hours, more than enough time to limp back somewhere safe. While I poked the strangely repaired rib, Anari got out of his chair and reached for something big, at the top of the shelf. A spare environmental helmet. It had been built oddly, a glass dome acted as the faceplate for the massive helmet. Normally helmets were made with goggles instead, harder to break than a massive glass dome. I think he kept that defunct model because it looked weird. When he lifted the helmet off the shelf, the bulky thing knocked down a small avalanche of tools. Rat shit. I'll clean this later. Then he paused, as if an idea crossed his mind. Actually, he said, rubbing the white whiskers of his beard like a villain would. I think I'll apply my God's-given privilege again as the only adult here and have you clean this mess for me. He chuckled darkly. Last time, that lazy adult had tricked me into cleaning up the workstation for him in exchange for lessons on welding. But I'd had a lot of time to stew in my bed and prepare. A well-designed plan was put into action. Wait. I turned and scrambled on top of a stack of crates. Once stable, I positioned my hands imperiously at my waist, my back straight and regal, like the captains of the clan did when they wanted someone to pay attention. And standing up on these boxes let me properly lord over him. I took a deep breath and puffed out my chest. I am Keith Winterscar, of House Winterscar. By authority invested in my caste as a knight retainer, I shan't do your bidding. The engineer stopped in his tracks and gawked up at me. Yes, take a good look and tremble. House Winterscar only had a few hundred members, but we were still an entire rank above engineers and scientists. From my boxy throne with the full authority of my venerable house behind me, I must have been a terrifying sight. Anari broke down laughing, which was absolutely nowhere in my design document. Ah, but there's one flaw in your clever little plan, who's going to enforce it? He lifted up his hands and grabbed me off the stack of crates, slowly bringing me back down on the ground, next to the helmet he'd pulled down from the shelf. The guards would back me up. I only need to tell them you're making me clean things up. They'll shake you down for it, old man. And if you tell them, you'd be admitting that you snuck out to an engineering bay again. They're not gonna like that, I'd be betting. Scandalous for a noble knight retainer of House Winterscar to be visiting little old me. That brought out another fit of chuckling from the old man, especially when he watched me squirm around trying to think of a counter to his point. Before I could come up with another way to escape clean-up duty, the helmet was plunked on top of my shoulders. What's this for? My voice echoed inside the helmet. Well, what about other problems besides hard punctures? Like suit failures or leaks you don't know about. You'll have to deal with those too when you're out there. The glass muffled his voice. A few button presses later from him and a banshee-like wail rang out in the helmet. The high-pitched alarm hammered frantically in my ears. The air instantly started getting chilly at the same time. This, little man, is the emergency warning. If you ever hear this, you need to move fast. I get it. I get it. Can you turn it off now? I yelled at him, the siren almost drowning out my voice. It had gotten uncomfortably cold. A leak? My breath came out as mist. I already did. Anari frowned. You're still hearing it? Yeah. And it's getting really cold too. He glanced over at his instruments, puzzled. Oh. Can't believe I forgot about that detail. His hand loomed over the glass dome and tapped on it loudly. You're going to have to fix this one all on your own, just like a real grown-up. I nodded back at him, a bit worried now. Don't worry, it's easy. He smiled, and drew closer to the glass. You just need to wake up. Frost bloomed on the outside, coating the glass. The temperature continued to drop and danger flared in my heart in response. I screamed and clawed at the straps. It didn't budge. Too heavy. The weight dragged me onto the floor, my hands still unable to pry the thing off. Everything was getting so cold. The alarm continued to ring in my ears, louder than my cries. The ice expanded over the instruments, breaking system after system in bursts of shattered glass. Needles and gauges froze in place instantly. "Wake up, Keith. Or you're gonna die." Anari's features blurred from the rhyme. Now, only unfocused blotches of color diffused through the ice. The helmet's protective faceplate finally started to give in, massive cracks appearing on the dome, small pieces of glass snapping off and falling down on my cheek. The cold squeezed through those cracks. Reaching for me. Reaching to kill me. "Wake up," Anari said. "Wake up or die, boy." The dome shattered. Ice lunged for my throat. I woke with a gasp, my eyes flared open, hyperventilating. I was back in my full adult-sized environmental suit complete with intact goggles, Anari nowhere to be seen, no glass dome helmet, no workbench. No more memories of my childhood. Cold reality again. The shrill alarm in my suit's helmet continued to beat into my ear, refusing to let me drift back to sleep. Something's wrong with the suit. I need to move fast. My chest constricted when I tried moving. The cause was easy to spot, someone had applied glue in half a dozen places. And still my teeth clattered and shivered. My skin, ice cold. There had to be a leak that got missed. I'm freezing to death. It was a struggle to lift my numb arm. Somehow I got a visual on my wrist's instruments despite the shaking. The gauges were still working, the nightmare frost nowhere to be seen. The reading on the needle snapped a spike of adrenaline through my heart that finally shook me fully awake. The rebreather read is offline. No one could live without reheated air on the surface. I should be dead. How was I breathing? I shut my eyes and on a leap of faith, inhaled. No uncontrollable coughing. A dull dry pain flashed through my throat, the cold creeping in with each breath. The air wasn't frozen enough to kill with any real speed, unless I overstayed my welcome. How long had I been out that I'd lost enough heat to trigger the alarms? Where were my heating systems? I checked for the setting on my arm and got an answer. Someone had turned them off, likely to keep me from burning up. What was passable outside would quickly overheat anyone in less extreme temperatures, so if those systems had been turned off, this couldn't be the surface. My goggles restricted my field of view, but what little I could see, didn't look like the clan colony. Nothing around me looked like home. The only other place that wasn't frozen over. The one place no lone scavenger ever returns from. The underground. I was underground. No. Panic later. I needed to reboot the heating systems, warm myself up and plug the leak. I could worry about exactly where I was later. An analog switch on my arm controlled emergency temperature, and with a flick the backpack hummed to life. Lukewarm air flowed through the entire suit from tubing under the cloth, like a second set of veins. It burned everywhere it touched. Everywhere, except for my left lower rib, where the heat was being sucked away. Found you. My scavenger kit clicked open at a touch, still on the side of my belt. The field repair gun inside looked to be in working condition. It took me 3 tries and 20 wasted seconds before my frozen hand finally wrapped around the handle and lifted it out. The charge switch was large, like everything I owned, made to be used by thick gloves. It started humming in my hand the moment the flip was switched. The leak was a 5-inch rip in the cloth, hidden away on the left side. No wonder it'd been missed. Pain seared my skin as the glue sunk inside the open tear. It hardened instantly, doing its job as expected, holding fast to flesh and fabric alike. I slumped back down, too cold to care about anything else. Soon enough, the suit's basic sensors hit nominal. The warning siren promptly shut down, and I flicked the heater off. Everything was quiet again. That let me hear what I hadn't been able to before. Sounds of metal clink softly nearby. The source of the noise came from a man sitting nearby on a concrete block, tending carefully to an old rifle. Armored in plate with a single blood-red sigil on the shoulder pad. A faceless helmet turned my direction. The last time I'd seen that armor, it had been falling down into an abyss. Father. Chapter 2, Prelude to Violence. 7 hours ago. Underscore 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 un. I turned the power off. The environmental suit objected, of course. Loudly, full of opinions. Effects were immediate with each breath colder than the last. The chill wrapped around my throat, tenderly squeezing it shut. Today it was 22 breaths. 22 breaths before the cold breached the suit's system and it was too painful to keep breathing. Yesterday was 20. A slight improvement. I flicked the power back on. The internal air reheated to tolerable levels while I held my breath. I had been right, of course, just about 1 minute each time I tested it. The siren shut down soon after, sulking away. She'll have noticed my suit flatlining for a moment. All I needed to do now was wait until she came to check up on me. All scavengers, half hour until expedition departure. Wrap it up, people, we're on a clock. A voice crackled in over the wide area comms. That was a little earlier than I'd expected. It might not be enough time for my plan to get done. Around me, the white waste stretched around, a flat surface broken up by the ruins stretching a mile around us. They say it was once supposed to be an ocean, maybe a few thousand years ago. Bundled up figures, half covered in ice, trawled around, wrapping up their last tasks before returning to the expedition rest stop. One of them was rapidly approaching me. The only identifying mark was the blood-red family sigil on her clothing's shoulders. The same one I had. My dear elder sister, ever vigilant that her younger brother isn't up to anything stupid. Again. Black reflecting goggles obscured her face. But if I could see Kedra's eyes through all that gear, I'd imagine they would be mildly pissed with me as usual. You need to cut this out, she said. Each time I see your vitals drop like that. What happens if it's real, and that's the day I don't come to check? I waved away her question. I'd say I got what was coming to me, and ask how much to put that on my tombstone. But, since you happen to be here, lend me a hand real quick. She groaned and climbed up the rubble to reach me. Near my feet, recently cleared of snow and rubble, was an intact metal trapdoor. The only problem was the oversized piece of wall that had crumbled down on top. Kedra understood the conundrum instantly. Trapdoors and scavengers were a marriage made in heaven. I wanted to get in and the wall was being a dick about it. 3 guesses about what I need your help for, I told her, waving at the obstructing rubble. And the first 2 don't count. Fine. Kedra hissed, drawing out her occult knife. I'll cut your little rock issue out of the way, but no more nonsense like this. At least for the week, please. I promise we'll discuss it. She gave her answer as a raised gesture on her free hand. This one signified a graciously accepted defeat, if my hand sign language was still current. Kedra inspected the intact wall up close, planning out how she'd start the cuts. With a good starting point picked out, the edge of her expensive knife lit up in a beautiful blue glow. Then she sliced into the rock, the blade scything through the material with ease. I had a theory that it wasn't actually magic, but occult stuff felt different from tech. As far as we could tell, that dagger was just a slab of metal with electricity going through it. How it could cut things was anyone's guess. Chunks of concrete fell to the side, which I diligently grabbed and tossed away. It was slow work since she cut chunks small enough for me to clean up, but we made steady progress. Some days I wonder if I should just sell the blade. Kedra said, that way you'll stop pestering me each time like this. Come now, dear sister. You secretly love any chance to use it. Rakrab. Kedra viciously cut out a much larger stone. Once done, she turned and waved her knife in my direction. You simply live to annoy me. I have absolutely no clue where you got that idea. That's rather bold coming from someone within stabbing range. That knife waggled ever closer. See? You do love any chance to use it. Kedra sighed, giving up. Shouldn't you be gathering frostbloom right now? Why are you prowling around for scrap? You'll get yelled at when father finds out. I struggled, lifting up the enormous chunk she'd cut a moment ago. You know why? When I was 13, I got my hands on a book from the Third Era. It described the start of a vast and powerful invention, a network that linked everyone together. They called it the Internet. It's all gone now, of course. But the way I saw it, if humanity had done it once, then we could do it again. Don't you think it's time to give up? Kedra asked. Nope. I said, finally done with the chunk. Time is just a tiny price to pay for the potential payoff. And I've only been able to look within a few hundred miles of the habitat. This time, we're going way farther. Anything could be out there. What are you searching for now? Didn't you tell me you found high insulation cables in the clan printing library? That idea didn't age too well. I confessed sheepishly. Thought I'd been so clever with that solution. Just put down a few hundred miles of printed wires. That'll do the trick, I thought. What could possibly go wrong with that plan? Kedra caught on. It's the pirates and slavers roaming around that are the problem, isn't it? Bingo. Anari told me it had already been tried out before. Someone or another eventually will cut the cables because assholes are part of the human condition. My journal had plenty of directions scribbled out besides the wire idea, but each ended up infeasible. Best direction was long-range wireless signals, but nobody knew enough about antennas to increase their range. Our best schematics had a maximum range of a few miles. Maybe if we worked all together for once and shared knowledge instead of guarding it jealously, we could escape this rat trap of a life. The internet could jumpstart that process. Human greed would do the rest, as those that did share with one another rose past those who hadn't. Kedra pointed at my basket again. This is all very interesting, she lied, and I can't help but notice your basket hasn't increased in size yet. Why exactly are you trying to open a trapdoor? I suspect that greed of yours is whispering pretty things in your ear again. Do you ever wonder who lived here? I masterfully shifted the topic. Kedra played ball with my deflection, examining the few visible ruins in between her work with the wall. This entire site was one huge cemetery, filled with ruined structures as headstones. Thousands had lived here, once. For these people, they likely lived well. Until someone decided they shouldn't. Kedra shrugged, pointing at specific parts of the rubble. Do you see how the concrete's been pulverized in sections? Explosions. As you would put it, the human condition made a visit here. Hadn't even considered how they'd died. Just another reason I'm not supposed to be a soldier, can't even properly think like one. I set the last chunk of sliced off wall down, wiping the frost off of it, a deep blue color timidly appearing under. Look at that, I pointed out, they even colored it. Can you imagine that? Painting an entire random wall. It was a ridiculous question in the first place. Who would want to waste valuable paint on a wall of all things? My sister didn't reply, probably waiting for me to answer. The math was simple for this problem, a quick estimation of the original dimensions multiplied by how much paint needed for 1 square foot, and I had my answer in seconds. I'd predict you'd need around 480 vials of paint for just this one section. That can't be correct, she said, trying to count something on her hands. That should be more paint than 2 months of trading? If my mathematics is correct. I laughed, proud that she'd remembered some of my lessons. You could always come down to the hangars and get a calculator from the local engineers. I'm sure they'd give you one, if you asked nicely with your rifle. She shook her head, not as interested in engineering as I was. I can't split my focus. My duty as a night retainer is more important to upkeep. Pay. I shrugged. I've been ignoring that my entire life, and nobody's bitten my head off. She stayed silent at that, staring out into the distance. Kedra always grew quiet when thoughts of family were on her mind. I could take a guess at who she'd immediately thought of, and I was thankful she hadn't brought him up. Ahead, scavengers were slowly making their way through the rest of the ice and rubble. There weren't any standards, everyone wore whatever we could find or afford. Weaves of brown, grey, and the occasional splash of expensive color to separate each. Hodgepodge helmets of different types and shapes, with scraps of armor pilfered over time. If it kept you from dying, it was good enough. Most undersiders think it's frostbite that kills up here. It is, after all, the first and most obvious thing to come to mind. But it's science that does the killing. After a certain temperature, water is practically all condensed into snow or ice. Air up here is far drier than the delicate membranes in your throat, nose, and lungs. A single breath is a death sentence. Even if you find shelter from the environment immediately after one breath, you will still die on a sickbed days later. They must have been quite wealthy to get all this paint. Kedra said, deflecting away from our previous topic. This could have been a center of trade once, or maybe the comms clicked and a man's voice sounded from it, someone we both knew and feared. Keith, Kedra. We're on the move in 10 minutes. Do not be the last ones back. It clicked shut right after. No reply expected, only obedience. Father was like that. My sister spun on her heels, already taking steps back to camp. Hang on a moment. I shouted behind her, we're almost done with the wall, just a few more cuts and the door's free. He will not be happy. She muttered, pausing in her steps. When is he ever happy? He'll kick the bucket before anyone catches him smiling. I wish you didn't have a point. Kedra sighed. But we should still make our way back to the convoy. I doubt there's anything worthwhile under that trapdoor. Relax, we're close enough. We'll make it on time. It's not the convoy I'm worried about. She glanced over at my mostly empty basket of frost bloom. I got unlucky. I lied. Are you trying to sell me a box of snow? You know you are the one in deep problems, right? Kedra said. Why am I the one stressing out about it? He's going to strangle you if you come back with only this. She pointed at the basket. She's right about that, it worried me. Far more than I wanted her to know. If this dig didn't pan out, I really would be deep in the rat shit. I'd made a bet that there'd be something worthwhile underground I could leverage. But she didn't need to know the payoff chances I'd guessed it. No worries. I said, instead of confessing my fears. See, I've got a clever backup plan. There's a guy I know that can sell you premium fortune cookies. That finally made her laugh, the little inside joke between us digging down as deep as I'd hoped. It could have been my imagination, but I think some of the tension finally lifted from her shoulders. Only one of us should be worried about my problems, and I intended for that to be me. Maybe it was a little bit in bad taste to constantly make fun of that poor trader, who tried so hard to sell us those fortune cookies. But it was for a good cause. He'd understand. And then ask to be paid for it somehow, knowing him. Kedra jogged the rest of the way back up the rubble, ready to dig out some basement secrets with me. She thought this had been a trade hub. Filled up with fat cats living the good life. Selling fortune cookies to anyone gullible enough. But I wasn't as convinced. They hadn't been rich at all, I thought instead. They wouldn't be here on the surface if they were. My guess is that these poor souls had rediscovered rare files or even a fully working chemical printer to create materials like paint. They'd only lacked the common sense to hide that discovery. And so, inevitably, the human condition came to collect. Maybe, it missed a spot. Chapter 3, You should have left it closed, dumbass. Unlike me, Kedra had been doing as instructed and gathering her quota of frost bloom. And now she was stuffing some of her morning's work into my mostly empty basket. Appreciate the help, but you should keep it to yourself. At this point either the trapdoor has loot in it, or I'm already screwed. I said. I'd rather prepare for both outcomes. She transferred another handful of that weed into my basket. I have enough for two. They say life finds a way, but this weed, frost bloom, took that lesson and ran with it. No doubt cheated too, given the unnatural metallic tint covering the leaves. That didn't look organic. And to be fair, I genuinely doubt anything organic could possibly survive on the surface. The trapdoor had a handle along with a few gears on the side, likely some sort of system to assist in opening it. I grabbed the handle and gave it an experimental tug before answering back. He'll find out anyhow, I said. That helmet of his will scan the weeds. There is a chance he forgets. At least there's a possible backup plan. Changing topics, how many breaths is it today? My sister asked, deflecting the topic, while I attempted to pry open the recently freed trapdoor. 22. There's an instrument called a thermometer to calculate this, brother. I can even buy one for you. Bah, it's just numbers on a gauge. 12 breaths means something more, let's say visceral and real, than some emotionless number. This trapdoor was clearly not going to open up easily. I considered asking Kedra to slice open her way through, but that came with its own issues. I'll confirm that the door is immovable first before resorting to that. I tugged on the trapdoor handle more firmly this time. It still wouldn't give. Going to have to savagely pull with both my legs and arms here. Kedra came to my side, grabbing another part of the handle. Where do you come up with these ideas? This time, I said in between breaths, I can't take all the credit. I got it from Teed. He likes to convert Celsius into theoretical seconds of exposure needed before frostbite. When he says today is 10 seconds, you get a much better sense of how cold it is. With a metal screech, the trapdoor finally gave in to our demands. It revealed a concrete staircase going down. Kedra and I stared down into the pitch darkness below. My dear sister, I couldn't have done this without you. I'll allow you to go down into the spooky dark basement first. Kedra scoffed, patting the rifle on her side. As if that was ever in question. Remind me again, who has the rifle? And who has a pistol that's cheaper than snow? That would be her, yes. The bargain price pistol would be mine. Triggering our headlights, Kedra drew the rifle in place and descended the steps, the lights piercing into the gloom. I followed behind, my pistol out and ready. The stairs led down to a metal blast door. Fortunately for us, nobody locked it on the way out. A bit of muscle and the old door swung open on old hinges. There wasn't a rush of air from a temperature difference, so it must have been here long enough that the environment equalized through the metal. Behind the door was a single square room filled with old instruments. Dust covered every panel and keyboard. Every screen black and dead. A few old shrivel chairs gave the safe house a truly cramped feeling. Kedra stepped in slowly, rifle leveling through all the possible angles. This was the dangerous part, where possible dangers might have been laid out or structural failures. Flakes flew up with each step we took into the room, lit up brightly from our headlights. Looks like we're here first. I muttered out. I find it difficult to believe so many scavengers missed this. Was it hidden away? Yep. Obscured from view. I did a bit of digging on a hunch before I could even see the trapdoor. It was too odd to see the remnants of a hallway finish on a dead end. So instead of gathering frost bloom like assigned, you went searching blindly, on hunches. I jabbed a thumb at my chest. Hey, in my defense, whose hunch paid off? Mine did. The old seats still looked sturdy enough and I slipped into one easily. Terrible squeaking and creaking. A little awkward with the environmental suit's backpack and metal plating, but good enough. What is your objective here? Kedra asked next, headlight examining the different consoles while I got to work. Even if you do find a power cell, he's still going to yell at you for not bringing back a harvest. He technically didn't specify I had to be the one that harvested all those weeds. You plan to trade scrap you found for Frostbloom. Anything to avoid work, hey? Kedra said, connecting the dots. Yep, 2-for-1 deal. Even if the tech I need isn't here, I've still got my bases covered. You know what they say, if you're working hard, you're doing it wrong. They don't say that at all, you say that. Kedra shot back, to which I tactfully ignored. From the consoles, screens, and wordings I could read, I'm mostly positive this was some sort of security CNC center. Would make sense to have that kind of operation deeper underground. Hence why it's still completely intact, unlike everything else. Problem was that security centers wouldn't hold any of the information I've been searching for. The only files I'll find here are security logs maybe. None of those highly coveted printing files. Sighing, I moved on to Plan B. Do you believe there's anything of use around? Kedra asked, still scanning the room for dangers. They probably had a local backup generator set up somewhere, if they were smart. I replied, scanning the room for loot. With luck, we might really find a power cell to pawn off. If there's circuitry, then there's wiring. And if there's wiring, there's a path to follow that leads to power. In moments, I'd found my target and traced it back to a panel. Locked, of course. I could cut that for you. Kedra offered, as I tested how firm the metal was with a few tugs. I have a more civilized tool for the job, you barbarian, I said, unhooking a crowbar from my backpack. A few seconds of aggressive negotiations later and the panel dropped on the dust-filled floor with a groan. Bent and defeated. Behind were breaker switches, lots of buttons and one large lever with a red handle. This must have been the safety release toggle. That'll open up the maintenance panel where we could get to work unhooking the expensive power cell. I'll then sell it for a week's worth of Frostbloom and gloat about it. I flipped the switch. Nothing happened. It didn't work. What was it supposed to do? Kedra asked, rifle still up. It's supposed to connect mechanically to a maintenance panel, but I think the gears got disconnected. There wasn't any weight when I pulled it. Rifle shots sounded out upstairs. The local comms exploded out in my speakers, mayhem starting upstairs. Roach has been shot. Need backup right here, right now. It pinged only a few feet away according to the tracker. We're nearby and can assist. What's going on? Kedra barked out, switching frequency to the local area, all business now. We were trying to disassemble a broken turret, a woman's voice said. But the thing turned back on just now and started shooting. We need a relic knight over here now. Rat shit. I've got him stabilized, she continued. He wasn't wearing his medal right, old fool. Some of the bullets nicked him by his leg. Nothing I can't patch up, but it's got us pinned behind a wall. Not sure how long this will hold. Kedra turned to me, switching over to private comms again. Can you fix it? Now. She practically hissed at me. I tried flipping the switch back up. Nothing happened. Of course. Let me find out what's wrong under the hood. I replied and wiggled the paneling under the switch with some more crowbar action. More sounds of shooting drifted down the stairs. I felt my stomach start making knots. I don't have a single good memory related to gunfire while on the surface. Finally, I broke the covering with a heavy yank. And cursed the moment I saw what was actually under the switch. This would not get fixed. What? Kedra asked. These people might have lacked common sense and got bombed to the ground for it. But they'd been surface dwellers like us. Of course they hadn't gone out peacefully. They rigged the panel. Kedra swore. Their plan made sense. Some scavengers come by, likely the ones that bombed the place, and try to loot the booth. They go for the obvious power cell, and trigger the turret unknowingly. Get shot to pieces the moment they exit. Someone had been real salty about their home getting blown up. And nobody made an easily fixable trap either. My sister turned to the stairs the moment she realized I wouldn't get lucky shutting down anything from here. Wait! I shouted out after her, we just need to wait for a relic night. They can take care of everything. And how long will it take? They're all out past the perimeter. We are responsible for this, Keith, we have to step up. Well, technically you didn't flip that switch, I did. And second, wait, come back. Kedra stormed up the stairs. Nothing I said could convince her otherwise. She took her duty to the house and cast too seriously. Relic Knights had the gear to tank turret fire. We, on the other hand, are very squishy if the bullets hit the wrong spots. She wasn't dumb though, no heroic charge from her. Instead she stalked carefully once up the stairs. Towards the sounds of danger, covering every angle with her rifle as she advanced. I followed behind, complaining the whole way but pistol grudgingly at the ready. The noise came from a block of concrete that could rotate on itself. Twin gun barrels sticking out. Already turning around to aim at us. My sister's rifle aggressively fired before the turret could fully rotate. The bullets pinged off the concrete block, dealing absolutely no damage. It, of course, returned fire the next moment. We dove to separate sides, hiding behind loose metal ruins. Bullets ringed against the wall, loud enough to sink past all my suit layers. Instruments on my arm flared, needles pointing at the increased power draw, trying to either recycle or vent the extra heat I was generating. The thing's too thick for rifle fire. I shouted over to Kedra. She knocked her head, exasperated. Do I look blind to you? The turret turned, looking back for its original targets. I could see them huddled now, two scavengers cowering. Hang on. They said they were working on dismantling it, right? Kedra caught on exactly what I'd been thinking, perhaps they left some panels exposed. Not sure, but if they did, can you land the shots? I asked. You get me the time. I'll find the panels and I will not miss. I took a quick peek to see what I was working with and immediately dove back. How'd it spot me that fast? Little bits of death whizzed above, right where I'd been a few seconds ago. The suits could hold back the cold, but they weren't going to hold back machine gun fire. Getting you that window might be easier said than done. That thing will take my head off if I even peek at it. I yelled back. Well, solve it somehow. You keep claiming you're a big boy, right? Can I answer no? She didn't reply, instead threw me the worst possible curse she could think of with her free hand. This thing was almost predicting when we'd stand up. Except that turrets don't operate on intuition. The machine either knows or doesn't. And the only way it could know is if it can see through walls. There weren't a lot of ways a targeting system could do that. Occult magic doesn't mix well with tech, so it's not some strange new occult weirdness giving it sight. Warlocks are all rich anyhow, you're not going to find any on the surface. X-ray? No, too short range and needed a lead backdrop. Infrared camera? Yeah, that was cheap and could do the trick. I could fool that. A bit of fiddling on my arm instruments and I vented all the spare heat. A moment later, bullets from the confused turret started firing wildly at the exhausted waste air. I was right. Dumb programming overcome by brilliant human ingenuity. Kedra's rifle barked out before I could even call for the shot. She got 3 rounds before the turret turned to deal with her. Scrap shit. I hit those panels directly. Do we have a plan B? Kedra said. Well, if it survived the bombings and decades of neglect, I suppose a few measly bullets wasn't going to break it now. Try again. Not my greatest idea ever, but what else could we do? Fine. Give me another distraction. I could fire blindly. No need to land my shots, just spook the turret. Kedra would do the rest. Take your shots on my mark, and, mark. I whipped the pistol over my cover. The stupid thing shot the gun out of my hands right away. Can't tell if it was by accident or good targeting, but my pistol was sinking like a rock into the snow somewhere. Now I was both trapped behind this wall and also disarmed. Did you get it? I yelled out. Your distraction didn't last even a second. What do you think? I think that sounds like a no. Stay out of the way. A somber voice ordered over the comms. I'll deal with this. Great. The cavalry had arrived. And out of all the relic knights that could come to the rescue, it had to be him. Chapter 4, Father. A burst of shots assaulted the concrete turret. Again, the turret's thick concrete puffed out in tiny dust chunks, but no true damage. It turned to open fire on the new threat rapidly approaching it. The man made his way on a direct intercept course to the turret, dropping the rifle now that he had drawn its attention. His movements were precise, measured, and didn't betray a hint of the raw power granted by the plate. A relic knight could move, all because of that armor. Metal armor, covered in ice and frost, complete with a faceless helmet. A blood-red family sigil, the only decoration the armor sported. The family sigil of House Winterscar. A full suit of metal was stupidity in most cases on the surface. But an ancient suit of power that laughed in the face of conventional physics, well, that's an exception. And Father's history towered above other knights as the clan's greatest warrior. This turret stood no chance. It still tried anyhow, opening fire on him, full auto. He ignored the attack, the sprint increasing, arms pumping methodically in perfect sync. Bullets riddled the armor, lighting it up with hundreds of sparks. At the last second, he threw himself into a skid, sliding the last few feet under the turret. Then seized the exposed weapon barrels with his gauntlets. Everyone coveted relic armor for a reason. For those venerable armors, ripping a turret in two was well within ability. Leveraging legs, back and arms all together, Father lifted. Metal groaned, cracks spread across the concrete block, even the turret's rifle tips started to bend. When a wide enough fracture formed at the base, he let go of the barrels and reached into it. A good grip on both sides, he pulled the fissure apart. The gun turret was pried open like an oyster, inch by inch. More metal screamed inside, being slowly ripped apart from the sheer force. Halfway through, it stopped firing. Probably some critical component bent too far out of shape. One final snap of metal, the top part gave in, falling down on the snow with a heavy thud. Everything went silent. The man didn't bother checking his defeated foe. The armor's helmet sensors would have already told him all he needed to know. Instead, I saw him go check on the hiding scavengers. That gave me some time to go fish out my pistol from the snow and hopefully sneak away. Except the snow was too deep and I couldn't tell where the gun had flown off to. Discussion floated over the comms, Father checking in on the wounded, getting the story from their side. And still I couldn't find the blasted pistol. By the time I found where it had sunk, Father was already stalking back. Straight towards us. He joined comms and immediately started right into me. The next time you get disarmed, I'll have your hide for it. How many years do I need to spoon-feed you the basics, boy? Father, Kedra said, walking up to him. Thank you for assisting us with this. Cordial as always, she was. Suppose that's the only way to handle him these days. He shook his head, those two scavengers will pay for their greed. They weren't supposed to be looking for scrap on a harvesting mission. No guessing what would happen if Father got wind that those two scavengers weren't the only ones looking for scrap instead of Frostbloom. A bruised rib wasn't something anyone looked forward to. I glanced nervously at Kedra, already feeling bits of panic rising in me. She didn't match my gaze. Instead, she took a deep breath. It wasn't their fault. I am the one that caused the issue. We were exploring an old bunker, and I triggered a trap. Parts of me were both relieved and uneasy at the same time. She hadn't mentioned what I'd been up to, but her sense of duty hadn't let her outright omit it either. I suppose she thought the only way forward was to take the fall for me outright. Made sense, father would only give her a slap on the wrist since she was the golden child. Me on the other hand, I'd be lucky to keep that wrist. I've never seen him hit her once out of anger yet. How many favors do I even owe her at this point? Kedra was a God's damned saint. He turned to her, slowly. You disobeyed the mission parameters and went scavenging. Then his head snapped in my direction, suspicious. Was Keith with you? Was it his idea? He was. And I made my own choices. Father grunted, I'm disappointed that you of all people hunted for scrap instead of carrying out your mission. I expected better from you. He turned to me next, clearly fishing for something. And you? Even with the faceplate hiding every feature, it wasn't hard to guess how his glare looked. Why, pray tell, did you miss spotting the trap? Ah! Of course he'd throw that at me. Kedra had focused on weapons and combat, while I'd opted for a jack-of-all-roles training. Against his advice, of course. Which meant I was the one most experienced in finding this sort of thing. But I hadn't been careless, this had been a particularly well-prepared trap. Even in hindsight, there wasn't anything I could have done better. They'd rigged it specifically so that it wouldn't be notic. Of course they did, you fool. It's a trap. Do you think they're targeting stupid animals out here? Stay calm. This will pass. Father stalked up closer to me, looming. You swore to me up and down, that your skills learned from those low-caste engineers put you above the typical scavenger. I've yet to see a single shred of proof from you. Today just marks another failure, boy. I stared back, heart beating fast with anger and indignation. But that wouldn't do me any good. Stay calm. The anger smoldered in my heart as I watched. Deep breaths. Don't explode. He turned to watch us both. You'll both report to those scavengers directly, explain the situation, and offer remediation. Understood, I will do that. Kedra nodded. Yes, father, I followed. The man turned to me next, grabbing my basket of weeds. Explain this. He held the half-empty basket, the accusation implicit. I picked the wrong direction to scavenge. And half a basket is acceptable. It's not a bad haul per se, just not a good haul either. Also, most of it was my sister's. Which he'd find out pretty soon. And yet you still chose to explore some bunker for scrap instead of harvesting. Dereliction of duty. Once again. He growled back, then turned to check over Kedra's work. The odds that two scavengers would return with exactly the same haul were slim to none. Of course, it was just like my sister to try making both baskets completely even. Not that it would have made any difference to hide that. I could see his helmet shift from basket to basket, the relic armor's sensors telling him the full story as expected. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Those ancient armors were utterly priceless, handed down from generation to generation. Entire houses were founded on owning even a single one. And this is what he was using it for, to scan shrubbery in a basket just to get another dig at me. Of course, if I did laugh, it wouldn't end with me laughing. The man ripped a concrete turret in half just a minute ago. Father tossed my basket down at my feet. The frost bloom intentionally scattered all over the snow. With deep breaths, I silently got to my knees to gather up the herbs. Stay calm. Don't open your trap and make this worse. The anger roiled inside, but I held it at bay, letting it sulk back down deep. You can't keep shouldering his faults each time, he said, glancing back at my sister. He needs to learn. Only the true and full consequences of his own actions can teach him. Kedra said nothing, hands tightening on the basket. Then she took a step forward, shielding me behind her. He is a scholar at heart, father. Training him to be a retainer is not the best use of his talents for the clan. What talents? There are no scholars on the surface. The armored man pointed an accusing finger at me. You live as a warrior or you die as a slave. There's no middle ground for a knight retainer. No one will respect him if he stays in the bunker scribbling numbers in the dirt. That isn't his duty. That's rather rich coming from you, when you spent years wallowing in that dir. She shot back, but stopped when I got up and put a hand on her shoulder. It's fine, Kedra, I told her. It doesn't matter. And then the rage surged through me, burning with hatred, leaping free from my tongue before my teeth could trap them shut. Guess I'll just die like a good little slave the next time a raid comes. Ratshit. Father turned his head slowly at that, fixing his gaze on me. His hands clenched and unclenched rapidly at his sides, which was never a good sign. I'd hit a nerve and then dug a knife into it. I could see him taking his own deep breaths, fighting his own war. And just like his son before him, I knew he'd lose against his temper. Look, I said, taking a few steps backwards and raising my hands, placating. Already reacting to what was going to happen. The expedition is more important too late and too little. He lunged for me, hands empowered by armor moving at speeds beyond reaction. It closed around the cuff of my neck. Then yanked me off my feet and slammed me down through the snow. Not hard enough to damage my environmental suit, but enough that I could feel the ache. I braced for the follow-up slap by reflex, hand flinching up to protect my head, ready to see stars. That hit never came, though his hand was hovering at the ready, shaking. The rage boiled through that metal armor, directed at me. I'd run my mouth again and twisted the knife that shouldn't ever be touched. You will not disparage the dead of this house. Too many have died. His voice as cold as the ice around us. Return with 3 baskets on the next foraging site, or I'll never allow you on a main expedition again. 3 baskets? That's imp. I wasn't asking. He screamed, shoving me back down into the snow. I bit down whatever argument was bubbling under the surface. It was hard, but somehow, I swallowed any anger or righteous indignation. Those emotions wouldn't serve me at all right now. There was only accepting and moving on. Yes, Father. I understand. Father scoffed in disgust. You should know better than to say those things to me, boy. Neither my sister nor my father said anything else as we entered camp. Departure was in less than 15 minutes. That was the only reason I hadn't been sent back to go gather the insane amount of baskets Father demanded. This site cost me. I'd gotten too carried away thinking I'd just find the tech I needed at every site I visited. In retrospect, I should have stuck to my job in yanking out weeds for provisions. This place's chance had been way too tiny. Build up favors, friends and more cards. And then play them all when a site seems likely to contain the tech I need for my dream. Chapter 5, A Knife to a Dream. The ships floated in the distance, a lazy meter off the ground. Attended by the mass of scavengers scurrying around the hulls. They tightened goods and polished off ice forming on the bows and engine intakes. The old airspeeders were massive, with racks of seats on the inside and a rough, bulky superstructure. Dotted around the hull were welded metal shelves and hand grips. Evidence of repairs scarred the plates, each with its own storied history of mismatched parts. These were old. Older than the clan I'd heard some people claim. It was amazing they still worked, a real tribute to the endurance of lost tech, if the right printing files were available to replace and repair parts. Other relic knights patrolled the camp, a wide berth given to each. They all displayed their own rich visual history of trinkets, clothing, and war keepsakes. Only the greatest warriors in each house wore these relics. or the most politically devious schemers. My house had been the poster child on that front, once. And all these clan heroes inclined nods of deference to our group of 3 walking in. For a moment, I could pretend they paid that gesture to me and not to the armored legend walking behind. One day, I'll prove that engineering and science can do more for the clan than any relic knight. And once I did that, maybe things would change for the scholar caste fathers so frequently dismissed. I'll have to trade and call in all my favors to make those 3 baskets at the next site, no matter what. I couldn't allow access to main expeditions to slip by. I knew the tech was out there, far beyond the habitat. Humanity had once been like gods, and we could do it again with enough knowledge. It all starts with the internet. Most of the camp had packed up and the last-minute preparations were being completed. The air was full of electric energy. Large habitat tents were dismantled. The final residents taking a few last bites of rations in relative warmth before suiting up for the long ride. Smaller one-man speeders zipped around, acting as scouts and escorts. They raced out into the distance with loud whoops, going far ahead of the expedition. Departure must be imminent if the scouts were given leave to deploy. Pretty soon, we'd be gone from here and the only thing left behind would be a mess of footprints on the cracked ice. I dumped the frost bloom clumps into the storage space of the nearest airspeeder. While we didn't have any assigned ships, I always aimed to get on one ship in specific. I was good friends with the, let's say, eccentric pilot. Very few reachers were allowed on expeditions, so only the best among them got the honor. And the best usually came with quirks. Climbing aboard, I made my way to the seating section, my sister following behind. 2 scrappers saw us on approach and nudged each other. They were clearly muttering to one another, too far away for us to make out under their masks. Once we came close enough, they connected over on the local comms. "Ah, young master," the left one said, "we would be honored to give our seats over." I sighed, "There any way I can convince you 2 not to?" They looked at one another. "We insist," the one on the right said, standing up. "You really don't have to, I'll be just fine sitting outside with everyone else." "No, no. You are the children of the Winterscar Prime himself." The remaining one huffed out, "It wouldn't do for lesser branch members like us to take the good seats and have you sitting with the low-tier retainers outside. We'd rather not stir up trouble." The rightmost man was already climbing his way out onto the hull, reaching for the metal shelving. "Ice it all, we're not so miserable as to take pity from House Winterscar." "We thank you for your generosity," my sister interjected, giving a nod of respect and taking the freed-up seats. She'd stopped trying to argue a long time ago. The 2 scrappers made their way outside, taking new seats on the metal shelvings. Hand grips and climbing straps would be the best they got to hold in place. "It's pointless," Father said, passing from behind us, going deeper into the airship. The doors shut behind him but his voice remained on the comms channel. "They know their rank. It would bring shame to their house to overstep it. Stop running from the duty that comes with it." I sighed and sat down, strapping myself in. "I just don't feel like I deserve this or anything." "You don't. But someday you might. Begin with remediation to the ones your choices put in danger first." "Ah. Right. Out here, conflicts were handled privately between parties, or at worst brought up to the house leadership. The last thing anyone wanted was to bring the issue outside the clan houses, into public ruling. Winterscar was in an odd position when it came to that. But it wouldn't sit right with me to abuse my authority and rank just to save a bit of scrap. Death was pretty common for anyone venturing outside the safety of the clan. This sort of remediation was done often enough. I'd been on the other end of a few myself, so I knew what to expect. I turned to Kedra and we both scoured through the comms logs over the next few minutes, finding the names we needed to connect with. More and more scavengers climbed aboard, and soon the local comms channels were filled with chatter. But we'd finally traced the signal despite the distractions. Looks like our unlucky pair had climbed on another airship. A quick connection request later and it was time to get to work. Ah! A woman's voice popped from my headset speakers. I reckon you're the two that tried helping us with the turret earlier? Surprised to see Winterscar's. You two the real deal or spoofing the logs as some kind of hooligan joke? No ma'am, we are from House Winterscar, Kedra said. How's the victim? I asked, moving the topic to more happy things. Like a man getting shot. Grumpy. A man's voice answered through the comms. Rat shit contraption took me in the leg. Now I'll have to sit out for a few days while buggers get rich around me. Suppose that's what I deserve for gettin' loot fever on the job. The devil convinced me mind'd be a good idea at the time. I gulped. So about that. We are the ones that are most likely responsible for the turret, sir, Kedra said, joining in and explaining the whole thing. Nothing was left out, and since father wasn't in the comms with us, that meant she could safely include who the real culprit was. There was a dark chuckle on the comms. So. I reckon this be a call for remediations, Winterscar. I had a feeling this man was grinning wide wherever he was and rubbing his gloves together. Roach. Don't you dare bully the poor kids. The woman said, followed by some rustling that sounded like slapping. You a done your share of rat shit when you were their age. And they're Winterscars for Tsuya's sake. Have some compassion. Winterscars or not, I still gots bullets in me leg, woman. And compassion don't buy food last I checked. He sighed, but... suppose we all know this happens common out here. He chuckled darkly. Unlucky? You'll be the one lootin' a turret while on gathering orders. Get greedy dealin' with the devil like that, don't be surprised when it don't work out for you. The woman said. And they did try to help, dear. That should count for something. Sacrifice be written right in the oaths of duty. They ain't no reachers to be coddled, they're like us, no extra points for doing the bare minimum. No, wait, don't slaw. There was some more scuffling over the comms. His voice came back momentarily. All right, fine you blasted snow witch. You Winterscar pups, bring back a cell and I'll call the remediation done and over with. A power cell? Hey now, you got shot, not maimed. Power cells were hard to come by, but they weren't an impossible goal either. A whole power cell for a minor wound was doorside robbery. This was the sort of price point the next of kin would be asking. Ha! Yet trying to haggle after riskin' me life. He laughed, gutsy of yet. Well, come and get some then, let's see what ye got. Underscore 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 un. Turns out I don't got. He talked me around circles and almost haggled me up. In the end, we came to the conclusion I wasn't responsible in terms of foresight and skills, as he agreed nobody could have caught that trap, but that I was responsible because I'd chosen to delve into that hole in the first place. The power cell he wanted wasn't for pulling the lever, it was payment for my original choice to explore, when I'd been ordered not to. And that was sound logic that I had no valid arguments against, so I had to call it quits. See ya on the other side, little pup. With some loot in your hands, o' course. I begrudgingly agreed, and the deal was set just in time to see Anka Shadowsong climb aboard. Oh great! As if this day could get any worse. She came to a stop near the center, then gazed around the chamber, deciding which scavenger to yank off. As usual with the Shadowsong heir, her two henchmen Callum and Locke followed behind like the good little minions they were. You! She pointed at some random poor bloke. Out of that seat! And the two bugs next to him, begone! I tagged into local comms, watching them quickly unstrap themselves and make their way outside. One of them got too close to Anka on the way out. She inclined her head, not bothering to verbalize her orders. The two men behind her seized the approaching scavenger and practically threw him off board. Anka strutted over and sat on the vacant seats, her two henchmen following behind. It was only a matter of time until Anka spotted my sister and the fireworks began. Why Kedra, what a surprise! If I'd known there'd be rats like you on this airship, I'd have avoided it like the plague. The rest of the occupants inside remained quiet. Nobody outranked her here. Only Kedra and I were technically at the same caste tier, with our father being the Winterscar Prime. Which meant nobody was going to jump into this argument. So I stepped up to the plate. I don't see anything stopping you from getting back out, princess. Ridiculous. I've already settled in. It's insects like you that should know better. I whistled. Well, who shoved ice up your ass this morning? The two minions bristled at that, Callum's voice patching through first. You don't have the right to address the lady, even less with the trash that comes out of your mouth. Bold coming from you, buddy. Didn't your boss pick you out of some garbage pile? Anka raised her hand before he could retort, shutting him up. Callum, the best insults are sharpened with truth. Ignore dull barbs from an abandoned mutt like him. After all, nobody civilized was left alive to educate him. Do you need me to teach your minion how to read and write next? Callum unhooked himself from his seat, standing up. If you're looking for a beat-down Winterscar, I'm more than happy to deliver. Or are you going to hide behind your sister again, you coward? Kedra groaned, now getting pulled into the fight. My brother apologizes for antagonizing you three. Please sit back down. I don't apologize, but Kedra's arm yanked me to the side of the seat. My dear brother, you owe me. I'd like some peace and quiet, and you're going to make that happen. Are we clear? I turned to glare at the standing minion. I apologize for my rude behavior. The lackey stayed standing, glaring back at me under his goggles. There's some irony here, how neither of us wanted to surrender, but neither of us wanted to piss off our respective bosses. Anka finally waved him away, ordering him back into his seat with a flick of her head. Impressive, Kedra, you have him on a leash now. Good for you. Must you continue with this childish behavior? Kedra said, we haven't been teenagers for a long time now. Alas, time doesn't completely remove all scars. Only most of them. Such a pity. You only further prove my point. Kedra glanced up, an exasperated breath coming out over the comms. What do you really want? We both know you didn't come here by chance. Anka examined her glove, rotating it in the light, ignoring Kedra. Bits of gold jewelry glinted, as the light hit her bracers. I want my knife, she eventually said, primly. Almost as if it were an afterthought. Your knife? Curious, that's not quite how I remember it going. That knife should be mine by rights. She snapped out, furious all of a sudden. You should never have been allowed a spot in the first place. I was allowed to compete as per tradition. Your house isn't even a real house anymore. You've been wiped off the face of the surface for years now. Rules are rules. I suggest you learn to be content with second place. It'll be quite useful in your life. The lady went quiet, composing herself again. Scheming probably. Fine. No matter, I already planned for this. Well, that sounds ominous. She drew out a mess of papers from her backpack. This cost quite a bit of my own personal resources to track and obtain. Perhaps you might be interested. Anka turned so the title was on top, making it visible to me. Specifically me. On the page, Department of Defense, ECAC Field Antenna Handbook, June 1984. Bitch. How did you know? I asked, voice low. Finding something Kedra wants was a dead end. Nothing she cares for is difficult to acquire. You, however, my research points that you are full of desires far outside your ability to obtain. She tapped the stack of papers, like this book. Don't get excited. It might not even have what I need. For all I know, it could just be about software instead of the mechanical know-how on long-range radio waves. But scrap shit, if it did happen to detail that, a massive web of COMM boys all over the wastes would solve issues. Have them daisy chain information around, pirates and thugs wouldn't be able to find and destroy them all. I'm already at the limits of what engineers typically learned. Anywhere further into the third era was a fool's errand. It all got exponentially more complicated after simple circuits. Records from back then showed a different picture than today. They had hundreds of people collaborating to advance the field, instant access to every bit of information in the entire world, guides that could distill a lifetime's worth of work into a single paper report, state-of-the-art tools and entire nation's worth of budget to work from. And it still took them years to advance. A combustion engine was easy enough to understand. But even old outdated computers simply couldn't be reverse engineered from nothing by one person, especially with the culture of the clan. Research was seen as a time waste when those parts could be printed out and put to immediate use. Too much effort for something that might be outdated the very next day, if a scavenger happened to return with usable printing files. Civilization had once been built on the shoulders of giants, and today there are no giants to stand on. She must have read my journal entries to know about that. This was bait. If you think I'm going to ask my sister to trade her God's damned occult knife for a book, you're out of your mind. Anka laughed, putting the collection of papers back into her storage. Of course not. The value difference is ludicrous. No, I'm not offering a trade. I'm offering a competition. Kedra took a look at me and then panned over to Anka. What are the terms? This is rat shit, I hissed, turning on my sister. Risking your knife isn't worth it for a stack of glorified paper. The knife belongs to me, brother. I will choose to do with it as I please. Anka cut in, voice almost gleeful. Since the book's value is far below an occult blade, I'll allow you to select the challenge, so long as it is fair. Should you win, I'll give you the book. Should I win, you'll give me my knife. My sister stayed silent for a moment, mulling it over. I accept. When we arrive at the next scrap site, whoever returns with the most power cells wins. You will have to leave behind one of your teammates, however, as there's only 2 of us and 3 of you. She pointed at the minions, who seemed to almost bristle at the idea of getting separated. Additionally, I'll increase the stakes. Whoever loses must hand over all gathered power cells to the winner as well. I don't intend to win only a book. That was still a gamble, but we had a heavy advantage. Most scavenging teams were large and optimized for working at such a scale. Anka would find herself with only one teammate to rely on, a position she'd never been in before. Kedra and I, on the other hand, we'd spent years learning how to maximize the efficiency of 2 people. So be it, I accept. Locke, you will stay behind at the convoy for this. She turned her sights to us. I look forward to victory. I stared at my sister, horrified, and switched over to private comms. What have you done? There's no way that book is worth taking a gamble on your knife. The occult blade is only a tool in the end. It's expensive, yes. But it can be replaced, or bought eventually. A dream is worth more. When I untangled just what she meant, it hit like a gut punch. She's going to cheat, I said, sniffing and trying to keep composed against the well of emotions. I'm only sentimental because it's not every day someone puts a God's damned occult knife down on a bet for my crazy internet pipe dream. Just a small one took years of saving up. A knife like hers would take decades. She will not cheat. Consider her position. Kedra looked up from her rifle, staring down her rival. Of all the options available for my knife, she deliberately chose a competition. It likely took her longer to obtain that book than to commission her own knife, and she certainly has the capital to outright purchase one. Lords, you political schemers are complicated. Kedra nodded, showing a hand sign for smiling. She's always been like this, Her pride is far more important than a knife, even an occult one. You don't know her as well as I do. Anka sat prim and properly on her seat, almost smug even. I could hear it in her voice. I hope you've enjoyed that blade, my dear. In a few hours, it will be mine as it should have been from the start. Kedra scoffed back, did you think I accepted this competition for charity? I fully intend to win. The antique airspeeder rumbled under us. Almost annoyed, like a particularly sharp stick had prodded it. The vibrations were making it through all my layers of printed fur. All crew, prep for takeoff. Keep your arms and legs close and make sure you don't forget to hook yourself up. I'm looking at you, Degrito. The comms system announced in a deep voice. I could hear the common channel blow up with laughter, and one indignant voice objecting the whole way through. Complain all you want, kid, you should have paid more attention to who's next to your hook. The pilot replied with a good-natured chuckle, silencing the comms noise. The rest of the expedition is heading out now, guys and gals. Take off in 3, 2, 1. Chapter 6, The Deathless. The ship rocketed upwards a few meters with a heavy groan. Gravity squeezed me down into my chair, but the seat's padding easily handled any discomfort until the acceleration passed. The scavengers that dotted the outside hull simply had to deal with the motion, tightening hands on their handholds. Our airspeeder lazily glided into line behind the other behemoths, small turns and stops magnified by the scale of the ship, hovering above the ground only a few meters off. The lead ship kicked off into gear, with the rest of the convoy including ours following steadily behind. Snow and sleet billowed off the sides as the ships gathered speed, cutting through the barren land and harsh wind. The next stop would be about 7 hours from now. Kedra, as usual, was using this time to meditate on past combat or drills. As father had trained us both to do over 8 years of angry yelling. As for me, my eyes stayed set on the horizon. Binoculars pressed as close to my goggles as physically possible. As if I was going to miss a moment of this trip with my eyes closed. A white sea of snow and ice covered the world. Maybe once every 2 hours or so, I'd catch glimpses of broken buildings far out in the distance. Towers, derelicts or even fortresses, all pressed out of their tombs over the years from the underground shifting around. The deep timber voice crackled out of my COMM speakers again, this time into my private comms. He was just about a decade my senior, the current pilot of this airspeeder and one of my few good friends. Teed. Kid, how you holding up? Almost got shot earlier. I grinned ear to ear, even if no one could see. I already owe someone a power cell, Anka is causing problems for the knife again, father wants me to gather an insane amount of frostbloom or I'm kicked from the expedition. And I think we officially crossed the farthest I've been from home today. All in all, normal day for me. Sounds like you're settling into the wastes. There are so many people, Teed, I don't even know everyone's names. Not to mention, I've never seen over 3 relic knights in an expedition before. And there are 20 tagging along as guards. 20. Main expeditions were a completely different beast than the tiny ones I've been on up to now. The possible future sites we'd find further out into the wastes and what could be found inside was making it hard to sleep each night. You'll get used to it, kid. Run enough expeditions, you see the same faces enough times to know 'em all. The roster count changes up, all the players stay the same. None of 'em trouble, right? Other than a certain lady. The normal folks all think I'm father's chosen right now, so they're keeping polite. Might change after they find out he hates my guts, and it's really my sister that inherited all of. Well, all that. Whatever my father had that let him come out of unwinnable fights time and time again, Kedra had gotten it. For the first few years after he sobered up and began training us, I thought he'd stop hating me if I could be as good as my sister. Naive on my part. I realized the moment I opened the family ledger just how little skill would have changed anything. Your old man's not that bad. He wouldn't have brought you along with the big boys if he really hated you, Teed said. No, I said, chuckling. He's got too much principle to give up on me like he should. Let's change the subject, this is a sore spot for me. Are we on track to make it under URS? Of course we were. The convoy pilots were meticulous in their planning. If they messed up and missed the refuel, it could mean a slow freezing death for all of us. Well, they'd reroute to another celestial flyby, so freezing to death might be a bit dramatic. But it was the first thing floating on my mind to talk about, and Father's reasons were a sore subject to me. There was a noticeable moment of static before he replied, I've been piloting out in these white wastes before you even learned how to sneak out of your house grounds. Been, diligently checking the charts every hour. I noticed a suspicious amount of time before you confirmed direction. Just enough time to take a reading from an astrological chart. Very suspicious. Yes. Well, you ain't wrong, he said, giggling to himself. But I could find camp under one of the gods with my eyes closed. Don't need any of these charts. Much. I heard a knocking on metal over the speaker for good luck. Navigation is a lost art, kid, and I'm, let's say, an artisan explorer. Getting too big for your britches there, old man. He scoffed. Younglings don't know their place anymore these days. Talking about that, ever thought of sneaking up here to the cockpit with me? You'd make a much better reacher than you would a retainer, no offense. I wish I could. Though maybe not a pilot. I'm more of a tinker and make things type of guy. Not sure I'd be good at plotting out astrological charts, or keeping track of where the gods are orbiting. Rather leave that to the priests and pilots. I answered honestly. I know learning how to navigate would be something you'd be good at, kid. Actually, let me offer a more convincing argument, there's numbers here, he said, using math as bait. I can even rustle some up right now. You like sevens, right? He was probably doing the eye waggle with that last bit. Teed was someone whose personality carried directly through the deep timbre voice of his. Kedra said his voice was more like dark chocolate. Leave it to her to compare a voice to food. Someday, I said, ignoring the bait he'd put out earlier. I wasn't that easy to hook. Problem is I can hear him in my head already, honor and house Winterscar something duty and responsibility. Ugh. I've got to find a way to get away from all this rat shit. Flip him a new one. Tell him you're going to follow the Reacher oaths of duty instead of the retainer one. Oath is an oath, right? He's got to respect that at least, the clan lord set that in stone. If only it were that easy to switch lives, Teed. Yeah, but who'd actually stop you? Only Winterscar's left running around, last I counted was your sister, your father, and you. Knocking on metal resounded over the comms again. I don't think you could disappoint your sister, angel that she is, and don't suspect you could disappoint your father, well, more than he already is. Again, no offense meant, honored retainer sir, the three gods above praise your name, Isatira. You've got a weird way of respecting your betters. I'll start a blood feud with you if you keep showing me lip like this. Fear me. Oh, I'm shaken in my boots. His grin could be practically heard through the comms at this point. Tell your dear sister to hold me, I need reassurance for my poor plebeian soul. A glance over at Kedra showed she hadn't moved a muscle. Still cradling the rifle in her hands. Meditating correctly, as expected of a knight retainer, unlike her gossip monger of a brother. Alas, poor Teed, dear elder sister's one genuine lover in this world will always be that NAR-15. This romance of yours is not made to be. A simple peasant like me can dream, sir. But seriously. What is it you see in her anyhow? She's my sister and I love her to death, of course, but she's too prim and proper about everything she sets her mind on. Not to mention she's a caste and a half above you, that's always a messy scandal when it happens. But it makes for the juiciest gossip. He sighed over the speakers, maybe I'll tell you when you're older, kid. I've got grey hairs already, mostly from you. How much older do you want me to be? Right, and next you'll be trying to show me you got hair down there too. I solemnly swear it's also grey. I'd rather eat ice than ask for proof on that one, he chuckled, then interrupted me before my next breath. Hang on Keith, got company comin' up here. His demeanor and attitude changed completely. Ah, Lord, welcome. What can this humble navigator do for you? And this time, the respect in his voice was genuine. This felt like eavesdropping on a more private part of Teed's life. Either he'd forgotten to turn off his comms with me, or he'd wanted me to listen in. But that guilty feeling was pushed down by my inner gossip-mongering. There's only one person in the entire clan who had the title of a lord. I am Lord, it can be done. Have to travel further north for about a day to catch back up with URS if we do this. If we divert for too long, Tsi's orbit is also in range, though we'll have to backtrack a few hours to reach it. A shorter moment bridged this gap. Hearing something indistinct in the background. Teed's voice picked up soon after. Of course Lord, I'll set the new route immediately and contact the rest of the convoy with the change of plans. If I might ask for preparation reasons, why the change? I strained to hear the voice in the background talk. If my father was a living legend in the clan lord was a being straight out of myth. He was deathless. An immortal being more akin to a demigod than a human. They say he's lived over 400 years. To put it another way, he tags on the main expeditions to handle things that relic knights can't. Ah, I understand Lord, consider it done. The static in the speakers interrupted my thoughts, and all was silent once more except for the humming of the engines. The airspeeder turned on itself now, with my side rising upwards as the whole thing tilted. Almost immediately, the rotational pull squished my chest against the straps, wanting to rip me off my seat and into the open as the speeder gracefully turned. The scavengers hanging on the outside hull nervously tightened down on their handholds. Dangling feet rising upwards with the pull. It wasn't anywhere strong enough to worry about, especially since everyone should have strapped their clips in. Still, nobody wanted to be the first in years to fall off an airspeeder mid-ride. Oh, you'd survive if you tumbled correctly. Assuming nothing important broke on your suit during the tumble. But the entire convoy would have to stop and turn around to fetch you, which was plenty embarrassing. Gods damn it, Teed muttered a moment later. Why did he pick my ship, of all the ships, to spend the trip on? Right so, fess up. I demanded. You don't just drop this sort of delicious gossip right by a rumor monger like me and expect to escape. My comms on this entire time. You know it. All right, go ahead, you nosy little monster. His voice was resigned, knowing exactly what sort of person I was when offered gossip. Let's get the interrogation over already. I was happy to oblige. Where does he want the convoy to go? Teed answered with an almost verbal shrug. He said he felt something call out to him from the west, gave me coordinates and all. What? He just had a gut feeling something was at these, perfectly specific coordinates. Gut feelings were no basis for moving an entire 400-man operation. It's more likely he hadn't felt anything but didn't want to reveal more about the true source, if I had to guess. Then again, he was a deathless. The stories about their powers were always changing around. So what was he planning? He says drive me there, well I'll do exactly that and smile the whole way. But word to the wise kid, if it's got him interested, it's way out of our league. He knocked again on the metal. Anything happens out there, you don't ask questions. You run. Fair enough. I've heard stranger things about the deathless. How far away is it? Coordinates are close by. Should arrive in 3 hours or so at this speed, so it's closer than our previous target. Got any idea what's waiting for us? Not a single clue, kid. It could be a breach into the underground, a site, or maybe another reason. Or maybe the reason he brought 20 relic knights with him isn't just for security. Chapter 7, A Monument to the Gods. I'd been wrong on my assumption, our destination had been a derelict site. An old one. Which meant our competition with Anka was a go. The airspeeder spanked into a clearing, snow flying off, revealing the bumpy metal ground underneath. In a moment, our expedition had touched down after a long 3-hour trip. The frantic movement of industry exploded out from all sides of the landed ships. Crates were hauled out by the dozen. Portable habitats deployed and tied down. Scavengers were already grouping up, plotting how to excavate this site. Through it all, one man stood silently watching the site. A good stretch away from the industry behind him. Unmoving like a statue, a massive fur coat over his relic armor. His helmet cradled in his arm. The utterly lethal air blowing mildly across his cheeks and through his hair. Relic gear was fueled by ratshit magic that regularly gave physics the middle finger, but at least you had to wear the blasted thing before you get to bend the rules. How do you think he does that? I pointed to where the man stood. Do what? Kedra was still busy unloading her gear from the airspeeder, not looking at my prompting. That. I said, pointing again. Maybe she hadn't noticed how our clan leader was walking around without a god's damned helmet equipped. He's deathless, I believe that's one thing they're known for, brother. Kedra shrugged, turning back to continue accounting for all the gear. I know that. I hissed back. I mean, how do you think it's possible? Lord Atius was more plain than the reputation painted. He looked like a worn-out military officer, at the career point where coffee had started to lose its power. A short black haircut, with sharp blue eyes and a slightly unkempt grey beard. Gods, it was downright creepy to see a face with only the blue sky above. That man stood fully exposed in the sunlight, quietly pondering the ancient derelict ruins ahead. Hand resting on the pommel of his occult longsword, a blade with a more extensive chronicle behind it than multiple houses put together. Kedra helped another scavenger lift a crate out of the airship, before regrouping behind me. Perhaps the deathless are part machine. Machines attack anyone on sight, I said. All the Imperial pilgrims and our traders say the same thing. So either it's a massive conspiracy, or it's the truth. And if I had to bet, it probably isn't the fun one. Kedra didn't look like she was paying full attention to this. Maybe she wasn't as rattled or curious as I was, but I had to gossip about it. We swapped more theories until Kedra cheated the question. It may be some form of lost tech? Do you suppose they feed off power cells? Lost tech was a lazy catch-all term to anything that made little sense. Sort of like saying a warlock did it. But it couldn't be power cells. Too many holes in that theory. I told her. She chuckled, motioning me to turn around to inspect my suit's backpack. I'd wager you spent a few hours actually considering that silly idea and calculating the numbers, haven't you? I tutted, offended at the implications. I'll never disregard an idea just because it sounds improbable. I'll disregard it only when it's proven wrong, or too much work. And in this case it wasn't a lot of work, more holes in that theory than the last wall I'd used for cover. Only a handful of deathless lived on the surface like Atius did. If they ate glorified battery acid, we'd see them coming up here regularly with the pilgrims. Tagging along with expeditions to charge up their favorite snack. Instead, they're all underground, locked in an eternal tug-of-war with the machines. Well, if you ever find out where they come from, I'll trade you a ration bar for it. A random ration bar for the secret to becoming an all-powerful demigod. Kedra scoffed. Please. I'll only accept if it's strawberry-flavored. There was a slap on my back, signaling that she'd finished the checkup on the suit's systems. It was my turn to check her gear as she turned her back to me. This part shouldn't be done haphazardly. It would be the only time either of us could fix issues without pressure. Once on site we'd have significantly fewer tools to work with, and a lot more stress given the situation. With each click of my sister's gear, the reports flashed by on the green screen, showing nominal across the board. Satisfied with the system's integrity after a good moment of fussing over, I slapped her back, letting her know she was good to go. We both turned together to view our objective in the far distance. This site would be a full scavenging one. I was off the hook for the 3 baskets of frost bloom, at least until the next grove was spotted. What do you think it is? I asked her. Why ask me? Last I checked, you would fare better at guessing that. Fine. I brought out the binoculars and got to work. The site in question was about a mile away. The buildings were squat and rectangular, with broken walls on all the floors. Thin spire-like buildings dotted the site, encased by ice and catwalks. A few massive broken-down satellite dishes dotted the sides, so large they had entire buildings dedicated to them. Which made this ruin at least a Third-era site. Second Era didn't have radio. So this place could be really old, or just a replica made by a building printer with this architecture in memory. But given that the whole thing tilted just slightly on the side and the entire structure seemed like it had sprouted from the ground, there might be a chance this was at least a genuine ancient site. Cocooned underground for centuries until the shifting ground spat it back out. Thought that was admittedly a long shot, and I might just be getting excited at the idea of it being something more. Lord Atius had commanded all of us scavengers to tear up the surface floors of the building. He'd be personally leading a team to dive into the lower levels. Given that order, he probably expected nothing outlandish on the upper levels of the site. Technically, this was the time we'd meet up with our house groups to plan how to scavenge the ruins. But for the past 8 years now, House Winterscar's entire scavenger team amounted to my sister and I. Despite the stakes for my sister's occult knife, our plan was pretty much unchanged: go forward and wing it. Other families had to split the work and make sure they weren't covering the same ground, which took a few hours because of internal politicking. On that front, a team of 2 was very easy to organize, and we didn't have egos to feed. That meant we'd get first dibs for a few hours before the rest of the expedition filed in. This would not give us an edge over Enka, however. She'd specified that the terms had to be fair, so we'd both be starting at the same time. I don't know what strings Anka had pulled, but she and her minion filed out of the tents with gear ready. She hadn't grouped up with the rest of House Shadow Song, so she's likely gotten an expensive exception for today, likely paying both in political power and material bribes. Only one other group was already assembled and ready to head out. Lord Atius and his hand-picked relic knights, 5 of them including Father. The 4 other relic knights belonged to powerful houses with multiple relic armors in their family lineages. 3, including Father, were primes, wielders of the first armors discovered by each house. And usually only the greatest warriors, or outright leaders of that house, wore the prime armor. Father stood apart from them, at the clan lord's right-hand side. Even with our house being down to a puny 3 members, results were results. Father had never known defeat, and no other relic knight in the entire clan could match him. A prodigy in combat, like Kedra. So long as he was sober, and he hadn't touched a bottle since House Winterscar was cut down to just us. Atius didn't care about someone's political status, or history. When he organized a mission, he chose the best to come with him. Despite Father's infamous past, the rest of the knights remained at parade rest behind him. We gave that group a wide berth. I suppose we should settle the rules for this now. Anka said over comms. Specifically at what time the hunt ends. I shrugged. When the navigators call for the expedition to return. Kedra nodded and then added her own conditions. No direct physical violence, no sabotaging, and no stealing already claimed power cells. This shall be a competition of scavenging techniques, not thievery. The princess gave an insulted scoff. Please, this isn't a bar fight. I accept your terms as you state them, both in spirit and wording. I will earn my blade in the name of House Shadow Song. Kedra flashed the challenge hand sign. You mean you will try to earn the blade? I doubt you will succeed. The terms are finalized. Let's begin. This didn't signal some mad sprint or dash to the site. Anka and Callum both turned and began a measured leisure walk. Kedra and I did the same. This would not be a competition about speed, even with a time limit. Rather, this would be a marathon, taking up at least 8 to 9 hours. The real winner would be whoever could adapt to the structure first, determine the fastest path to the most likely locations, and extract the power cells. Oi Winterscar pup, Roach's voice suddenly cut into my comms. You're looking for me power cell first, right? Rat shit. Yeah, there's a situation that's popped up since. Ho, don't like the sound of that. Smells like someone thinkin' of renegadin' on the deal. Relax, I'm planning on getting you a power cell. It might not be from this site. Why? You plannin' on runnin' with the goods? I denied that quickly. We had a run-in with the devil and she's talked us into a competition. Was it fair to relate Anka to a devil? Unequivocally yes, minus trying to make us sign a contract for our souls. Read some more stories pup, deals with the devil are as rare as ice in those. Yeti have learned 100 times by now, nobody ever deals with the devil and comes out of it hale. What stupidity did ye get yourself into? And which devil? Kedra cut in, we have to collect more power cells than Anka's shadow song from this site. If we succeed, we win all the power cells she's collected in a book. If we fail, then I lose my occult knife and we surrender our own captures for the day. And what does that mean for me loot? Far as I see it, ye be gambling with my power cell here. Where's me interest? Fine, you cranky old gremlin, I said. How about this, if we win, we'll give you 2 power cells. If we lose, then we'll just give you the next power cell we come by. That way he'll still get his goods, just a site or 2 delayed down the road. Let's see him complain about that. Well then. I be expectin' some extra shiny with my name scribbled on it when ya win. Scribbling on the power cell wasn't part of the contract, I'll be charging extra for that. Ha! Ya certainly be learnin' from this devil right quick. Tell ya what, write something good down and I'll buy the first round o' drinks if it makes me laugh. Deal. I look forward to the most expensive drink I can find. The comms promptly clicked shut. I suspect you've spooked him. He might be allergic to paying for anything. Kedra said. Nah, he's just being dramatic. I can recognize my kind. Wait, where's Anka heading? Shadow Song and her single lackey had changed course. This wasn't much of a surprise, we weren't planning on going into the site from the same angle. But changing up not even a few minutes into the hike? Kedra figured it out before I did. Their target is Lord Atias's group. What? Why? I'm not positive, and that's exactly what has me troubled. We need to follow, at least to find out what she's up to. Our little duo also changed directions, following behind the Shadow Song team, towards the group of relic knights. These were the leaders of the clan itself, not people I'd want to ask about the weather. You could tell when 2 armors belonged to the same house as they shared their theme, though each still unique. 2 of the armors in the group had togas wrapped around, embroidered with writings, detailing the past exploits of House Shadowsong's long lineage. The other 3 including father were all different. Shadowsong had made it to parade rest by their side. As we closed our own distance, the clan lord turned and motioned us to join comms with his right hand. Gulping, I did as ordered. The comms request was accepted and soon their voices patched into my headset. Atias's voice was like gravel, as if smoke had ruined his throat. Are these your whelps, Tenny sent? Yes, my lord. They are. Father replied. Excellent. He turned to Anka, a bemused expression on his face. In the spirit of fairness, we will offer assistance to your rivals as well. Objections? She shook her head. No, my lord. This was as expected. Either the Winterscar Prime would make the argument, or Kedra herself would come when she noticed my change of plans. Atias nodded, then turned to Kedra. I wonder, little Winterscar, can you make an educated guess on what your cheeky rival's been up to? My lord, I suspect she's called upon the tradition and requested for the Shadow Song Prime to escort her group. I whistled, only for a half-second before shutting up. If Kedra was right, Anka was really stretching the rules here. There was a standing tradition of scavengers asking for their families' knights to protect the first scavengers into the ruins. The knights would take out the possible problems, and then the rest of the expedition had a safer time inside. Thing is, knights always went in first. Nobody needed to request anything. The tradition was purely used in ceremonial moments. Correct. Atias laughed, a full-bodied thing that sounded like it came from deep within his stomach. The little shadow song whelp did just that. What an audacious generation you lot will grow to be. Exciting years ahead for me. He seemed so much like a jovial grandfather, I'd almost forgotten exactly what he was. Until he peered again into the distance. In that frozen moment of time, he seemed as ancient as ice. As if the weight of centuries hung from his shoulders, his gaze far away and worn out. The Deathless turned back to his hand-picked guards, taking a casual breath of the lethal sub-zero air. It's been long since I've found the time to simply walk, years perhaps. I suppose I can indulge myself now and then. He nodded, almost as if trying to convince himself, then turned to Anka. Normally I'd deny this kind of request for obvious reasons, but the current mission isn't urgent. He pointed one armored hand at the site, his great cloak slipping to the side with the motion. That's been there for centuries by now, an hour or two more isn't going to change anything. We can spare it. If any of the relic knights felt insulted at the thought of babysitting scavengers, they were far too professional to show it. After we've located a way down into the superstructure, we'll split ways with the scavenger whelps and continue to the primary objective. He pointed over to my father, Winterscar, Shadow Song. Keep track of the little ones and make sure they're safe. Objections? No, my lord, I thank you for the opportunity. The Shadow Song Prime said. As he said. Father added, nodding to his fellow Prime. Good. The rest of us will fan out into the site and continue with the normal first phase of the operation. Clear dangers for the main expedition to scavenge safely. I don't want casualty reports when we return. I fixed my eye on the horizon line as we began the march towards our destination. The site stood tall in the distance, harrowed out by the ceaseless high winds. The superstructure stripped down to its bones. Trails of ice growing on the skeletal remains like mold. Dead. And waiting. Chapter 8, The Tomb of the Stars. Ice stalactites, oriented almost horizontally, decorated the superstructure. This place had seen very high winds, exposed as it was. The closer we got, the more detail could be made out. The spire structures had entire scaffolding dedicated to each, now used as a perching spot for snow. The satellite buildings had panels missing, exposing the skeletal underbelly. That said, all my thoughts were circling around how to beat Anka. Generally, most building architecture would consolidate power into one place, usually in the basement. They called that a transformer room. So whoever found that room first more or less won today's match. Where things might get interesting was down to the purpose of the building. A fortress would have multiple different transformer rooms, so that if one failed another picked up the slack. A hospital would have a small generator for each wing along with multiple backup generators. And so forth down the list of possible buildings. Still no clue what the hell's this site was built for. And if I didn't know, then neither did Anka. You look like you have a plan. Kedra said, clearly overestimating my abilities. Getting to the basement first would be the obvious. My rivals trundled forward in the snow at a slow pace, also talking between each other. Planning just like we were. Callum was a brute of a person, built like a bear. The problem was that Anka had standards for her minions. Callum wasn't just brute muscle, but also smart too, which was the worst kind of combo to be up against. He'd probably point out the transformer room as the goal post, so I could bank on Anka also going for the basement first. Or come up with a completely different plan depending on if they knew more than we did. Too much we didn't know right now. Even if we get to the transformer room first, we can't rest easy. I wrapped up. You think there might be more sources of power? I'm positive. I pointed at the buildings around the main site. Those satellite structures must each have their own power supply, and that's just starting. Then we'd have to dig around to see where the backup generators might be located too. Backup generators were trickier beasts. They were stored in a way that preserved them indefinitely, at the cost of some efficiency. Had to be very careful not to wake up a sleeping beast, as I'd helpfully demonstrated on the last site. It's not extremely dangerous, however, most sites are too damaged. If the backup generators were triggered, few things would still be connected. This site, on the other hand, looked almost preserved. Only the outsides had been harrowed out by the environment and neglect, but the innards looked functioning. We discussed strategy over the next few minutes, tossing out different plans and narrowing down what we could and couldn't do. We'd even considered the merits of cutting our own shortcuts by using the occult knife. Finally, running out of ideas, I suggested splitting up. That did not go down well, for obvious reasons. I placated Kedra by offering to take on the main building. Knowing that there were 5 relic knights prowling around inside that building and the clan lord himself, Kedra reluctantly agreed with the plan. She'd take on the surrounding satellite buildings. Once I beat Anka to the transformer room, they'd bail from the center complex and try to find power cells outside, which Kedra would have already tagged. The planning session was going rather well until a high-pitched motor started up behind me. We both turned around just in time to see a flying drone zoom past us, racing forward to the distant site. Its 4 propellers looking more like blurred discs fading away in the distance. There's only one person rich enough to bring a drone on an expedition. Anka had strapped herself to their hover sled, letting her minion carry her forward. In the meantime, she was piloting the mini quadcopter. This might complicate things, Kedra said, while I cursed the gods. No really, you don't say. If my suspicions were correct, that was a scouting drone. Anka was probably getting detailed imagery back. Looks like they'd banked spending their hover sled's energy already in exchange for possible early recon data. Kedra didn't seem bothered. This doesn't change the plan. No, but it does mean they'll find the best entry point before we do. She might even sneak the drone into the building to get a head start on mapping it. We will overcome this. Sure we will. By the way, do you know any loan plans available for occult knives? Asking for a friend. Kedra was unamused. Underscore 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 un. It was a long half-hour walk, each minute watching Anka get more and more intel on the site. I tried bringing up the idea of using our own sled and paddling with shovels to pick up speed, but Kedra refused that one. There's no point reaching the site first if the knights weren't around to help with any danger. I could recognize what Anka's drone had been, from the controller she toyed with. Early 4th era photography drone, before hover technology like these sleds caught on. Deep in the rat shit now, those drones would have excellent cameras and could stay up in the air for hours. It would have been great if she'd crashed the thing, but no luck. It zoomed back once we were close enough to the site. Found any egress points? Lord Atius asked her, amused at all the bickering happening. 7 so far, my lord. Anka said, nimbly catching the loud thing and tossing it back into the hover sled. I've already planned out a solid entryway that leads down to a lobby. If you need the swiftest entrance, I would be more than happy to share my findings. The Shadowsong Prime took a few glances between his daughter and Atius, to which the old Deathless laughed. I suppose I'll take you up on that offer. I'm sure your father would be proud to see the work you've done mapping the site, young lady. Anka's father sheepishly looked away, to which Atiya slapped his shoulder heartily. On my side, things weren't so jolly. My heart had sunk like a rock. Anka had gotten her drone inside the building and was confident enough to boast about it. Which meant she already had major parts of the interior mapped out. Scrap shit, for a spoiled princess, she's annoyingly competent. The team stopped a few 100 feet away from the site, taking the view in. Half of the site was sunken underground, halting all access to the first floor. Windswept ice encrusted most of the structure, making entry a little treacherous, and pack ice had grown around the sides. A beat later, some unheard timer hit and all of us brought out the safety equipment simultaneously. Hard hats, impact-resistant plates, the works. It wasn't comfortable to walk in, but it was common sense, always wear safety gear before diving into an unstable ancient building. Anka and her minion finished first, their gas monitors blinking green, showing active. If parts of the underground site had a lack of oxygen, those old gas sensors would kick in automatically. That was rare to see happen as most sites were well ventilated due to collapsed walls. This site, however, might have that issue pop up. All prepared, they climbed up a snowbank that had collapsed into the second floor. Kedra and I waited for her to vanish into the superstructure with the rest of the relic knights in tow, preparing our own gear and turning on the monitor systems. Okay, now she won't notice the plan. My sister nodded, then began to hike away from the site. Move like the wind, brother. Tsuya, guide your steps. And URS witness your trial. Don't worry, this is only a minor setback. I'll find another way in. Underscore 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 un. 15 minutes later, I was swallowing my words and Frostbloom would have tasted better. This hadn't been a minor setback. Despite casing the perimeter looking for alternate entryways, there wasn't a single way that wasn't filled with rubble. And I wasn't a zippy little drone capable of speeding around to check a few dozen corners in minutes. Kedra had gotten inside her own target building, as she reported 10 minutes ago. The real surprise was an additional companion. Father tagged behind, no explanation offered. Was he worried I'd start some trouble in front of the clan lord? That's a fair point in hindsight. If I weren't so focused on this damn contest, finding a way to be petty would absolutely be in the books. My salvation came in the form of a ladder. It stood intact at the side of a wall, going right up to the rooftop. The only drawback was all the ice that clung on the steps. The climb would be difficult. Thankfully, the typical scavenger baggage included climbing hooks and rope for a reason. While preparing for the journey up, Father finally broke the silence. You intend to climb here to the roof? Yeah. The roof's superstructure will be weak from all the snow that accumulated on top. I'm sure there's sections that caved in but are still traversable. Why? He nodded, stepped forward and picked me up. Under my suit, people would describe me as a twig. However, the suit itself and all my tools added to a good 50 to 70 pounds. Of course, that might as well be a feather to the relic armor. What are you doing? Before I could finish, he jumped. The leap cleared him up a good 10 or so feet up, where his free hand snapped like a jaw against the frozen ladder steps. From there he pulled, again throwing both of us straight up. The ladder groaned and creaked at the stress but somehow didn't collapse. With one last leap up, he cleared the rooftop and landed down into the snow. We'd climbed 3 whole stories in a matter of seconds. It was deep here, almost to my hips. Walking was a no-go. Fortunately, there was a good way to fix that. Normally hover sleds are brought as carrying equipment and kept light to not waste the power cell powering it. But as Anka had demonstrated earlier, there were plenty of uses for these. Why help me? I asked while getting the equipment ready. Moving with all this snow around was a right pain, but slow and steady wins the race. The Shadow Song Prime is helping his daughter inside the ruins, he said. Of course Anka was getting the extra assistance. Why not help Kedra? She's your favorite, isn't she? She can handle herself. I'm not so certain. Making sure I don't Darwin Award myself off the surface? Didn't think you cared that much. Darwin Award. A joke that pops up in old books all the time. It's about this scientist who studied how creatures evolve. I'm only fulfilling my duty to keep you safe. I have no need for a scholar story. Figures. All right, let's see what other use he could be. How much is the Shadow Song Prime helping? He is keeping a watch for dangers and assisting with navigation. And I don't get any help either. Father stared back, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. There wasn't any reason for me to train scavenging. I earned the Winterscar armor before I came of age to be a scavenger. Scrambling on top of the hover sled turned out to be a little harder than expected. It slipped away, wiggling in the air. If there wasn't a rope attached, it would have been next to impossible to bring back. You know there's other ways you could help, right? I'm not here to do your work for you. So why is Shadowsong getting the help and I'm not? Father crossed his arms. I refuse to enable your weakness. You'll get my help once you've earned it. That made me snort. What a liar. And how exactly do I earn it? When sacrifice calls, I shall answer it. Father quoted. The oath of duty all knight retainers swear to. It was our caste that put themselves into harm's way for the greater good. Our caste who ventured out into the dangerous surface to recover scrap and tech. And that's supposed to make us somehow better than the brilliant people who stayed behind to put that tech to use. Tell him you're going to follow the Reacher oath of duty instead of the retainer one. Oath's an oath, right? A moment of adrenaline spiked through me at the thought of rebellion. All right, Teed. Let's try your way then. A deep breath and I hardened my resolve. This could end up violent. Once I felt prepared enough, I turned to stare back at that faceless helmet of his, my feet firm and planted. What darkness covers, I shall bring to light. His hand snapped around my collar again and lifted me up. Cold fury radiated from his voice. This is not what you swore as a Winterscar. You are not a Reacher. Honor your duty. My heart pounded as my hands reflexively reached out to grab his forearms. A part of me wanted to just fold here, to escape. But I had prepared for this. Fear didn't rule me this time. One should always respect duty, no matter the rank. Do you disagree with that? Let's see him deny the words of the clan lord himself. He held me in the air for a moment more. So be it. Continue crawling in the mud. Leave your sister to shoulder everything while you cower from your duty. Then he tossed me into the sled. The hover sled wobbled dangerously, dipping down and kissing the snow before springing back up and floating further down, with me stunned on top. Deep breaths helped calm my nerves. He hadn't lashed out at me physically. Being disappointed wasn't anything new. This I could handle. I took my win and ran with it. Now situated a few inches off the snow, it was much easier to cover ground by paddling with my hands to the side. It took a few minutes for my heart to stop racing, but the physical movements helped center me. Father followed leisurely behind, as if nothing had happened. The armor simply didn't care about the hundreds of pounds of snow it was plowing through. And our ancestors actually knew how those armors worked once? Mind-boggling. I'm used to working with a wide range of different tech levels, but there's a hard limit around the lost tech era. Rumor has it, printers for those could only be found deep underground. My hunches about the roof had been correct, there were a few caved-in sections of roofing. Finding one that faced the right direction, my feet carefully carried me down into the collapse. Here the wind wasn't able to pile up snow, and the hallways looked accessible. I'm in. I clicked the comms over to Kedra. About time. What's your entry point? The roof. The roof. You do know where basements are located, yes? Are you still competitive for the transformer room with this setback? Maybe. It's a really big building, you know? Now let me focus on pulling a win here. Light from the outside only dimly reached here. And once Father and I truly penetrated into the superstructure, it was up to our own headlights to show the way forward. Empty hallways and rooms of various sizes waited in the gloom. There was a feeling of walking on hallowed ground. As I'd expected, this site was far more intact on the inside than most I've been in, despite the outside appearance. My headlights spent most of the time picking clear trails to follow on the ground. People have had punctures by falling on debris and it's never a fun time. I'm currently the underdog time-wise, but caution was always the priority. And the hallways were strewn with debris that had rotted away, falling from the ceilings or walls. Finding out what went on in this site would give me a better idea on where to dig for tech. I spent more time on any wall that looked like it might have had pictures or symbols. Eventually I hit a lucky spot. A big blue arrow pointing to Data Center 2. Sites dedicated only to data storage were mentioned occasionally in books, but this would be the first time seeing one. Perhaps data storage was just a side feature? This architecture is too strange. Kedra said over the comms. What do you mean? There aren't any airlocks, the walls are thin, and occasionally it looked like entire windows had a view directly outside. Well, that doesn't sound like it's up to any building codes. Or common sense. The lack of an airlock could be explained. Would get very windy each time someone opened the door, but not a deal breaker to a large enough building. But thin walls? And even worse, windows to the outside? Tempered glass could withstand the temperature difference, but considering all the glass I'd seen was shattered, that theory's probably out in the snow. Small cubicle offices lined the sides of the walls and I spent a few minutes inside one. The chair neatly tucked into a desk, drawers, and cabinets crusted over with ice. The handles on the cabinet really drew my attention. Office items don't look made for gloves. I have noticed the same in my building. Keyboards, switches, every type of instrument. None of it was created with gloves in mind. Outside equipment had to be large to work with these thick gloves. Even Kedra's occult blade had been transferred over from its original handle to one almost as large as the knife itself. Relic armor gear was the exception, since their gauntlets were normal-sized. I seriously doubt the office workers who spent their time here all wore relic armor like it was casual wear. This place must be really old. Either it was built underground and eventually emerged or it was built back when the world was warmer. And it must be huge to have stumped Anka for this long. Or she was keeping her discoveries quiet. Who might have lived here then? Kedra asked. If only I knew. You're not normally interested in that. What's with the questions all of a sudden? I'm not, more idle thought as I'm exploring. But I suspect finding out the mystery here is all you're thinking about. And you are a chatterbox. I thought I'd offer you the courtesy of indulging. If only other girls of our caste were as considerate. All they not so sneakily ask about is if I'm going to inherit the armor or not. A shame really. What do you tell them about the armor? I'm really vague about it and let them come up with any answer for themselves. So I technically never lied to anyone. She chuckled darkly, that's quite the evil plot, dear brother. I didn't think you had it in you. No arguments from me, dear sister. But since all they care about is the armor, I don't feel quite so torn up about it. We continued talking gossip while the exploration dove further into the superstructure. More and more private offices littered the hallways. Someone was bound to have left a tablet or some information that could be recovered from these rooms, maybe even paper could have survived if it was frozen over. Alas, Anka already had a massive head start and distractions couldn't be afforded. The curiosity burned under me, kept in check by priorities. The main hallway, or at least what was left of the hallway at this point, opened up into a larger room. Simple metal tables filled the space, empty and desolate. The ones that weren't rimmed with frost glinted back our flashlights, as if surprised to see humans walking nearby again. A mess hall of sorts. I made a mental note of where this was in relation to the rest of the building. At some point, the kitchen would need to be pilfered. They always had a spare power cell. Anka's voice sounded on the local comms. I've checked over the last stairwell down, all paths underground are indeed blocked, my lord. Oh. This was a lucky break. It's not that the place was too big, it's too much blockage. That's why she hadn't gloated about finding the transformer room yet. Understood. We'll have to try a different building. Atias said. Our target isn't in the site itself but further down underground. Any path will work. If I may be so bold as to make a request from you, my lord. Your occult long blade might be able to cut a path into the flooring for us. Interesting proposition, Anka. It's worth an attempt. You are welcome to follow behind if it works. Your ropes are kept in good condition, I'm assuming. Amendment, this was a short-lived lucky break. And now Anka was probably 10 minutes away from finding the transformer room first. I needed to get real clever, real fast. Or my sister would be paying the price. Chapter 9, Never Challenge a Winterscar. I'm pretty much fucked. As a trained scavenger, this is my professional opinion, fucked. 3 entire stories above the floor I'm supposed to be exploring, while Anka was getting an entryway cut into the ground by the god's damned clan lord himself. Only thing she was missing was a red carpet and some confetti sprinkled from above as she righteously descended down to claim the transformer room. This wasn't the end of the world. I needed to be logical about this. The only possibility of winning left now was if that transformer room didn't exist. And that was out of my control. So here's what I was going to do, not go looking for a transformer room. Instead, I'm going to assume it's not there at all and plan around that. If there isn't a transformer room, then where else would power be located? Data Center 2. The writings on the wall, large and blocky. Important. If there were data servers, then there had to be power supplying them. And if by some chance this building didn't have a transformer room, then the power could be close to those, if not in the very same room. No other option than to retrace my steps, find the wall directions and pray to Tsuya that the power cells were there. And if that failed, the next plan was going to be a get-rich-quick scheme of some kind. Say, rich enough to buy a knife. Father continued stalking behind me, like an ominous shadow as we sped through the hallways. Figuring out what his game was could wait until I'd secured the power cells. It took a few more minutes but thankfully, the wall signs made it clear where Data Center 2 was. The hallway opened up into a large room, not quite as big as the mess hall had been. In the center was a large dome, with a railing surrounding it. Desks and tables circled the dome, while the walls held dead and cracked screens, keyboards and other 3rd or 4th era tech. Looked like a control room of sorts. Outside, through what had once been windows, were the spire-like structures we'd seen from a distance. Faded paint showed emblems and numbers on the sides, and wire-like pipes connected the building to the main structure. Watchtowers maybe? With all the window walls shattered, the environment had free rein into the room. The place was blanketed in a thick layer of snow on most parts, burying entire workstations. It didn't matter. This must be the data center. Somewhere under all that snow and paneling were wires, and those would lead me to treasure. I got to work with my crowbar, aiming for the panels not covered up first. I am actually curious about one detail, brother. What's rattling around in your head? I said with a grunt, as I pried open my first panel. Do you have any theories as to why these people left? That made me double-take for a moment. What makes you think they left and weren't just murder-looted? Have you seen any skeletal remains on your side? Ah. There had been no signs of cadavers yet. How had I missed something as obvious as that? This damn contest was really getting into my head. Almost all of the rooms I've been to were cleared out or well organized. Kedra continued. No pictures or any personal items left anywhere. Chairs are tucked into the desks. The mark of people who had plenty of time to prepare for a scheduled departure. All damage looks to have been done by age, no bullet holes or explosive damage. Explained why this site was so intact, it hadn't ever been sieged before. Which begged the question, where did they all go? The workstations were a dead end, so I moved to the walls next. That had some success. Sitting plump and fat were a few massive wires, clearly built to carry power. I'd have to guess where each might lead to, and then investigate. Panels were ripped down, wires investigated and followed, rinse and repeat until there'd be no more wires to follow. Kedra and I chatted the entire time, keeping each other company over the work. It soothed my nerves, and pretty soon I was back in my rhythm. Until Kedra got nosy again about my social life. What about Distra? I guess gossip mongering was something built into all Winterscars, deep down. When I asked for more details on what she meant, she specified. That one girl you spent some time with a year ago. Also after the armor, I said. But she made me almost believe I was handsome, so points for that. Might you be too focused on finding manipulations that don't exist? The other houses don't all behave like Winterscar, you understand? Gossip I heard was that she actually did think you were handsome. Even if she wasn't completely after the armor, which I doubt, she didn't like to talk numbers. Poor woman was prepared to jump out a window if cornered by an integral sign. Please, brother. If you're looking for someone who likes numbers as much as you do, I don't think anyone in the cast would be suitable. Nonsense. I answered back. Elysia is an amazing mathematician and we've spent hours talking about tech and the stuff she tinkers with. She's amazing. Elysia is a reacher, not a knight retainer. She's happily married and a good decade your senior. Absolutely off limits. Well, she's proof my standards exist. I just have to keep looking. I heard a sigh over the headset. Keep looking where? It sounds more like you're avoiding anyone within the retainer houses. It's not like Father Wowell. A guilty glance confirmed Father was still present in the room, quietly watching like a hawk. Even knowing he wasn't on my private comms, I still spoke with a lower voice just in case. Look, if I caught a feral pipe weasel, slapped lipstick on it and married the furry little monster, Father would probably congratulate me on finding my equal. Let's be serious here, you're the one who's going to inherit the armor, Kedra. I'm just a footnote. Nobody would care if I marry an engineer. Who inherits the armor is still up for debate. Children complicate things for me. I swore. Not at the conversation, but because I'd just found out that the second-to-last power wire connected to another useless panel. Which meant the last power wire must be where the power was coming from, and that wire was going directly into the massive mound of snow I'd been avoiding. Sighing, I unpacked the collapsible shovel. I suppose some manual labor never killed me. Yet. Well, if you swore you wouldn't have kids, then what? Our house isn't in a position where I'd get to make that choice in the first place. Unless Father remarries. And he hasn't. The bastard was leaving all the unspoken issues for my sister to shoulder. I can't believe that hypocrite would yell at me for leaving things on Kedra's shoulders. The selfish prick could solve so many issues by just remarrying already and recruiting new blood from the houseless. Hundreds would be willing to outright fight each other for the right to go on scavenging expeditions, even the tiny expeditions to refuel the clan's power cells. Inviting new members was all up to the house leaders to pick and choose who joined the house. More prestigious that way. Certainly had nothing to do with bribes or any of that nepotism, no sir. At least Reachers didn't have politics to join their houses, they only required an intelligent head and a few tests passed. Everyone had a chance to earn it. Father hasn't even bothered to see a single applicant in the past 8 years. Not a word about arranged marriages for either of us, no attempt to look for his own. It's like he'd completely avoided all subjects related to our house, leaving it to slowly rot away. The man revered honor and duty, and yet completely ignored this part of his duty. Kedra didn't continue, growing quiet instead. That was par for the course when talking family with her. She'll hit a wall and then shut down. The snow shoveling was slow business in the silence, but also slowly getting somewhere. With some luck and the three gods willing, there would be something somewhere under all this snow. Kedra finally spoke up, a good 10 minutes later, unexpectedly breaking the silence. When I think about having a family, I want to do better than what I had growing up. She quietly said. Relic knights are not deathless, but they deal with the same league of danger. Growing up without a mother is a hard thing for any child, and I could never wish it on my own. Well, I think I turned out just fine, thank you. Too much rat shit politics haunting this house. Look, just loan the armor out and call it a day. You'd only be required to wear it for ceremonial occasions. Father did that for what, 13 years straight? You can do it too. Minus the drinking and being generally pathetic, of course. Sure, it wasn't the honorable thing to do and was plenty scandalous, but who cared now? Plus we'd get money to fill up the emptying house coffers. Plenty of warriors in our house wore father's armor, at least back when everyone in the house was still alive and scheming. The family had been all too happy to abuse his sad little broken heart, buying him all the booze in the world, and then taking the armor out for a spin to impress the clan lord while he was passed out. By that point he'd already lost all of his titles and fame. The whole house knew it was only a matter of time until Atius was forced to intercede, take charge of the armor and declare father an invalid. They were practically foaming at the mouth waiting for that. Pissed me off to think about. If you're dead set on wearing the cursed thing yourself, I'm sure you could hire a nurse for you while you're out in the field. No one left in the house to manipulate the servants to quit this time. I'd dug in a little too deep on family history here. I was sure she wasn't going to bring the topic back up. Nor would I press her about it. Talking about the Winterscars does not bring out good memories. I could imagine the idea of giving up the relic armor to others would be anathema to Kedra's morals. But where does honor and duty leave people? At least my house had known and understood that implicitly. I continued burrowing like a pipe weasel deeper into the snow mound, anger propelling me forward. Eventually the other side scraped against my shovel. Caution, maintenance only. The panel read. Ho ho ho, jackpot. Now if power cells hid behind this, that would mean Anka could be looking around for something that doesn't exist. But if there was just wiring behind this panel, then I was deep in the rat shit. Holding my breath, my crowbar slammed expertly into the side. A twist of effort pried the panel off. Behind, in 2 rows of 3, were perfectly preserved power cells. 6 in total. Sitting alone and abandoned. I love it when I win. These must have been primary generators since they were all completely spent. So if these were primary power generators. Elation soared through my head, thoughts of getting both the book and gloating rights now back in reach. Anka was looking around underground for something that didn't exist. Game wasn't over yet, I'd only taken the lead, this was Data Center 2. Which implied there was at least a Data Center 1 somewhere, if not more. It wasn't enough that we won, Shadowsong had to lose. To make sure she didn't even get a possible shot, I'd need to find that data center, and pilfer it before my competition. Kedra and I both agreed to keep it quiet for now, after I broke the news to her. Anka was looking in the wrong place and we weren't going to do anything to change that. Carefully, I reached into the storage compartment and unhooked the spent power cells. The hand-sized cylinders were filled with frozen water, likely compressed inside. Once a power cell was used, the leftover waste would be drinkable even in theory. This was the masterstroke of the Fourth Era, after which power technology never changed. Even Lost Tech was powered by these things, and that appeared centuries later if our history was accurate. One after another, these 6 treasures were lovingly lowered into my hoversled and strapped down. Kedra spoke up, after having gone silent for quite some time. Keith, it was wrong of me to say that to you. Say what? What I said about mother. That was crass of me. Had she been brooding about that this whole time? Did she think I'd be hurt about not having a mom? I don't mind. There's no way you could remember anything about her either. I do, a bit. Ratshit, you were what, 5 when she died? I am 7 years older than you, not 5. Details. I barely remember Grandma, and I was 7 then too. You were 6 when grandmother died. Not 7. I doubt 1 year makes much of a difference. My shovel lifted up again and work began on the opposite side of the room, digging away to more possible power cells. If one side had them, chances were the room had a mirrored setup. Treasure wasn't going to just dig itself out. I don't remember all the details, Kedra said. But I do remember the feelings. A few of being held. A bath. Her laughing, getting carried on shoulders, and what I think was father smiling a few times. Now I know you're full of bent metal, I chuckled. Maybe he'd smile in that I'm trying really hard to be polite here way. Father still remained at attention behind, hand on rifle, waiting. He was a very different person depending on what year you picked. I'd heard some stories about who he used to be, before I was born, but they might as well be describing a stranger. Say, what time did you like better? Before or after the raid happened? I asked her, more out of idle curiosity. It would be extremely selfish to say I'm glad hundreds of people died just because my life became better for it. Kedra said. Yeah, but am I right? There wasn't an answer back until the second maintenance panel was just barely in reach. I hated them. She whispered over the comms. Every day I'd wished they'd all just disappear. I chuckled darkly, well, wish granted. Yes. Wish granted. Exactly like I'd prayed for. There was no mirth or joy at the admission. You know none of that was your fault, right? That raid was going to happen no matter what you were thinking on the inside. I have made my peace with it years ago. She lied. The shovel hit a hard surface. Which hopefully meant another panel and another 6 power cells. And if Kedra found a handful more on the satellite buildings, that would be game set and match. The crowbar came out again, while I continued to gossip about the past. For me, I liked it better before the raid. Sure, they were all scheming assholes. But they all mostly ignored me, and I was all too happy to ignore them back. Easy life. And it was easier when father simply yelled at us, puked and passed out on the floor each night. He hadn't expected anything from me back then. Though I wasn't a fan of those pity looks the family would give me. I know those looks well. Kedra said. It was the hypocrisy that rankled me. They'd tell stories of father at the banquets, you know, like he was some long-dead hero in the family. Raising toasts and politely clapping to their navel-gazing speeches. I heard grunting and sounds of the wall being ripped over the speakers. I wanted nothing more than to slap them, yell in their face, he's still alive, you vapid parasites, help him. I felt like I was the only person who still took care of him. Well, that's because you were. In a way they did help, I said. Not willingly, of course. No Winterscar would ever do a good deed without first attaching strings to it. My own panel crunched open, breaking me out of that spiral, the crowbar proving the superior tool once more. Behind lay another 6 spent power cells, just as I'd hoped for. Soon, they'd be yanked out and spirited away. My hands started the work on autopilot. Cell by cell, I pilfered the whole thing into the hover sled. Since this had been a source of main power, the power cables going into the wall might lead me to the next data center. I took off in the best guess I had, into the hallways. Even if you did manage to slap them into helping, it wouldn't have worked. I told her as I walked. Vodka isn't made from ice. Someone was buying him all those bottles. They did. My sister blurted out, followed by realization. Of course they did. How did you spot that when I hadn't? Adults let slip all kinds of secrets when they don't notice who's exploring under the floorboards. You're too honest to crawl around in the mud like I did. Please, I'm not a paragon of morality either. I also engaged in lies and deceit when I was forced to. Perhaps my definition of lies and deceit are just slightly different to yours, my dear sister. We can't be that different. Have you ever, even just once, opened a door without knocking first? She laughed. Voice like bells through the comms. Fine, I suppose I'll concede the point. But if I'd known, I could have stopped them. And they would have come up with something more dangerous if you did. I gulped guiltily at my actions in all this. It's the armor. That's all they were after. Of course they'd want to keep the real owner out of the picture, and especially the daughter that was still trying to right the ship. You didn't miss it, they intentionally hid it from you. Deeper into the superstructure, I found a blockage. The roof had collapsed, spilling snow everywhere, but there didn't seem to be more damage. The wires were leading here, going into the piled snow. In fact, I could see multiple thick wires through the broken walls leading to this room from different directions. Something here must be important. And it was buried under snow, of course. This time I didn't have to shovel for long before it hit something hard again. Once I'd scrubbed the ice off, the letters could be made out. Emergency. The panel wasn't locked. And under it, another red lever, like in the security bunker. Backup power mechanical failsafe. It read. I had 12 power cells already. Anka hadn't found the transformer room, she likely had little to none. If something were to happen right now, like the power turning back in, we'd be evacuated. The day would be over, the contest called. And we would win by a landslide. Lifting my shovel discreetly, the reflection of father stood grim on the trowel's blade, faceless helmet ever vigilant. The headlights in the dim light making it obvious to tell where his gaze fell. It was child's play to find the right moment he wasn't watching. Just one night would have been enough to handle any danger that this site could offer. We have 5 with the clan lord himself all ready for action. They'd pull us out safely in under a minute. Kedra was in her own separate satellite building, and those wouldn't be connected to this building's backup generator. They'd have their own power grids instead, so any event within this complex wouldn't involve her. The risks were sound. Yeti have learned 100 times by now, nobody ever deals with the devil and comes out of it hale. Shadowsong should have known better than to challenge a Winterscar. Cheating was our house calling and scheming in our lifeblood. Kedra might be above this and father removed from it, but I'd been born and shaped into it. You're too honest to crawl around in the mud like I did. I shook hands with the devil and pulled the lever down. Chapter 10, Gloss. Lights snapped back into life around me. The room hummed with power, alive again after centuries spent dreaming. I stood up, knocking some snow over the letterings behind me. Hiding the crime. General comms lit up right after, starting with the clan lord himself. Power was triggered in the central building. Report. Other voices sounded off, giving their location and general findings. Father turned to me, the Winterscar armor scanning me down. I gave him an innocent shrug, lifting my hands up. He took a step forward, every motion screaming with distrust. For now, Atias cut in. We'll evacuate the whelps. Winterscar, you're hovering right by your own for a possibility like this, correct? Yes, sir. Father answered, momentum cut. If there's an easy path out, take it. Get him out of the building, we'll regroup halfway between the expedition and the site. Understood. Iron sight, Kedra is in the outer buildings, go get her. Windrunner, assist Shadowsong with his own pair. All teams, although there's a low chance anything here poses a threat to us, move on assumption there is. It'll only cost us a pound of snow if we're wrong. Dismissed. The general comms clicked shut once everyone sounded affirmative. "We're going," Father ordered. I took a step back, trying to reach the hover sled. "Wait. I need those power cells." "Not important. Kedra's knife is on the line if I don't bring back those cells." That did not make him pause like I'd expected. He continued to stalk forward in my direction, hand threatening to reach out and yank me off my feet if I didn't cooperate immediately. "If need be, I will return for them myself, after you've been evacuated as ordered. We are going now." That worked for me, so I did as asked, following behind as fast as the environmental suit could handle. There's a broken window wall by data center 2, we could probably reach the roof if we jumped up from there. "The room with the dome and snow?" "Yeah, that one." "Is the armor mapping the way already?" Father nodded, diverting course to backtrack. Comms lit up with more chatter on the global channel this time. "This is Lord Atius to Expedition. Be aware, the site is confirmed to have running power. Recall the scavenger teams. Expedition actual to Lord Atius, we copy. Night teams are being formed now, Lord. We're reinforcing our perimeter and pulling all scavengers behind the lines." Atius confirmed the orders and the global comms clicked shut, but the local ones stayed active. Looks like he still had things to say. "Unfortunately for you four whelps, this means you'll need to wait with the other scavenger teams before being allowed back in. I hope you got enough of a haul for the day, because when you come back, it'll likely be with the full scavenger wave as competition." All according to plan. We reached the data center room and found it lit up with consoles and holographic panels. They were opening and closing rapidly. Father and I slowed to a stop, the sheer oddity captivating our attention. Then the terminal's ancient speakers lit up. The voice was heavily scratched up, with an odd higher pitch, but the machine still spoke well enough to understand. "Administrator confirmation required for this action." Another panel appeared, it had a username and password field. A login prompt. Asterisk stars filled up both fields on their own. What? The panel was gone almost the same moment it had appeared. What was that? Father seemed just as stunned, taking cautious steps forward. Administrator confirmation accepted. Purge protocol initiated. Error, storage bay 1 disconnected from system. Data successfully wiped from storage bay 2. Error, storage bay 3 unresponsive. Error, storage bay 4 unresponsive. Full data purge incomplete. A flurry of holographic windows and charts appeared across the entire dome. It looked like the entire system was haunted by a ghost, running amok at speeds no human could keep up with. A three-dimensional model of the site appeared, shifting around fast. In moments, 4 large cylinders were zoomed in on and highlighted in red. They looked to be somewhere deeper underground. On second look, they were just like the spire buildings outside, only laying flat. Before I could even take a wild guess at what was happening, a glowing blue message box appeared. It floated, a two-dimensional projection of light a few feet away from everything else, and right before my face. It resized to be 3 times larger, shifting colors to bright gold in quick succession. 3 messages appeared. Relinquished spotted the power spike. She's breaching through the firewalls and I can't keep her out of the system for much longer. She can't be allowed to discover the navigation data or the station's purpose. At any cost. I'm so sorry. What is? Father muttered, but the ancient terminal cut him off. Safety locks disabled. It chimed. Hydra heavy rockets IH-11, IH-24, IH-12, and IH-17 now triggered for ignition. All personnel, please prepare for takeoff procedures. A warning siren started up almost immediately after across the entire building, and the outside too. That was never a good sign. Warning. The station said, selected Hydra heavy rockets have not been deployed to launch sites. High chance of catastrophic system failure detected. Administrator override is required to proceed. A password prompt popped up into existence again in front of the displays, but already whatever was in control had typed in the password. Administrator override confirmed. The terminal said cheerfully, launch set to T-15 seconds. No, shut off. I yelled frantically, pushing random images and buttons. Each triggered a holographic window, which would be instantly closed before the window's purpose could be read. The ghost inside the terminal was shutting me out of the system using the most brutal method possible. Winterscar. Atias's voice snapped into the comms. We've evacuated successfully, where are you? An armored hand sneaked around my waist and pulled me up with no effort. We're leaving. Father said, turning and running to the open window. He leaped at it, using his free hand to vault upwards. We sailed up, falling back down on the roof with a heavy thud. No second was spared as he instantly barreled through the waist-high snow up here, still holding me with his spare hand. Father picked up speed with every lunge. The metal groaned under us from the sheer power in his strides. In seconds we would be clearing the rooftop, heading directly away from the site. The explosion hit first. It began with a muted roar that shook the ground. No heatwave chased us, but the entire building buckled and undulated like a wave, as if the surface had temporarily turned to liquid and behaved just like it. Father was thrown off his footing, skidding into a tumble and disappearing into the jilted snow, while the force wrenched me from his grasp into the air. Gravity reclaimed me in moments, slamming me down onto the snow-filled roof and stunning me for a moment, burying me deep. The worst hadn't even happened yet, the ground rose upwards a moment later. It was a struggle, but I wrenched myself back above to see what was going on. The entire roof had tilted, lifting high as the downward slope steepened. That gave me an unobstructed view of the cause. The ground below had turned into a massive chasm. The connected buildings were being dragged into it. While nobody sane would want to slide down into that massive abyss, the snow that covered the surrounding roof absolutely did, because gravity was a thing. It moved like an avalanche, all going at the same rate, straight to the maw. Father erupted from that snow, breaking free, instantly sprinting in a direct intercept course the moment he spotted where I'd landed. I reached out to him, but the snow had complete control over my motions and even that simple action was impossible. Still, he'd made it to me in seconds, one armored glove shooting out and clamping around my helmet with a vice grip. The weight was too much, and the hard hat's chin straps started choking me. I slapped the safety release before the straps could damage my rebreather permanently. That cost me a few more feet down the slope. Turning on myself, my hands reached out to Father. He tossed the hard hat away, snapping his hand out to grab mine. The hold wasn't firm, but he didn't have time to address it. We'd drifted too far downwards and the incline had continued steepening, soon to become almost completely vertical. I could hear the scraping of his feet on the roof, trying and failing against the weight. The edge of the roof approached, a waterfall of snow shooting out into freefall. His free hand dove into the avalanche, searching for anything to hold. Something snagged and he instantly stopped like a rock, snow breaking off against his shoulders and spraying over him angrily. He yanked me to a stop, but only for a moment. With a lurch, I felt myself continue to move downwards. His grip had slipped. The snow carried me away. A terrifying second passed as I watched him stare after me, his outstretched hand holding nothing but air. That faceless helmet somehow showing the sheer disbelief at the current events. Father dove after me a heartbeat later, almost in fury. The armor let him catch up to my position in moments and he grabbed with both hands this time, lifting me above the torrent. The end of the roof was upon us. I felt him tense down, waiting for the right moment as we were swept downwards. We hit the end. He leaped. That took us clear out of the snowfall and into the air. Not enough, not by a long shot. I could tell we would be falling into the abyss at this rate. With an audible grunt, he yelled over the noise, "Keith! Grab the ledge!" Then he hurled me forward with everything his relic armor could muster. which was a substantial amount. I sailed up again, propelled right at a distant collapsing spire building. Ice snapping off as the catwalk deformed, hopefully still sturdy enough to hold my weight. While I flailed around in midair, I caught a glimpse of my father. Far, far under. Throwing me had pushed him downwards. Time felt slow as I watched, the details burning themselves into my mind. Father didn't scream as he fell. Instead he was motionless, almost suspended in the air. Arms and legs at peace, body growing smaller as the distance stretched. Only the helmet still moved, unerringly following me until the armor had been swallowed from sight. Falling into the abyss. Instinct forced me to look back up, I had to catch the railing or die to the fall. When I did look up, I was rewarded with the sight of that railing much closer than it had any right to be. Turns out, the spires were also falling towards the sinkhole, so naturally the railing hadn't just been waiting around for me to land onto it. No, it had rushed to meet me with speed. I collided headfirst into it and instantly lost consciousness.